No one could anticipate such a turn of fate. The person who was destined for death in some incredibly survived and gained a new life in the world called Dashang. However, reality was mercilessly cruel to the young wanderer. But our hero was not one of those who dutifully inclined before the blows of fate. He was ready to fight to the last breath, keeping in the depths of memory the memories of peaceful times. When the deadly darkness was supposed to absorb him forever, the warrior unexpectedly opened his eyes. He discovered himself in an unknown place. In front of him stood a man with a good-natured smile, who looked with tenderness at the thoughtful young man. Lionsha clearly did not recognize his father, but he only affectionately patted his son on the head, chuckling at his unusual forgetfulness. Then the parent suggested going to the river to check the networks. Today they were expected by a rich catch. The boy joyfully ran after his father, trying to climb into their modest boat. Soon, as promised, with the help of networks, they caught an incredible amount of fish. Having enjoyed a delicious meal, the father and son began to have fun carelessly. They painted something on the mast of their little ship. So they spent all day until the very late evening. But suddenly, a shadow of a beautiful red carp flashed on the water surface. Not wanting to miss such prey, the young hero immediately jumped into the water for elusive fish. However, the carp seemed to dissolve in the river depths. And at that moment the wanderer felt his body froze in the water thickness. No matter how desperately he waved his hands, the movement was impossible. It only remained to call his father to help. After a moment, the boy woke up among strangers. He understood. Everything that happened was only a dream. There were two men in front of him, an elderly Ban Xinjiang and an important person, the Lord Or. At that moment, Liang Shi noticed with horror that his hands were tightly connected and completely motionless. Looking at the helpless prisoner, Ban Xinjiang only mockingly praised his master, who decided to lure the boy here in order to use as a bait for a water monster. Sly. Looking at the prisoner, the old man explained that they had guarded his peaceful dream all this time. Only then did the young man realize that the vision with his father was nothing more than another dream. The fact is that a month ago he got into this world. The initial owner of the body died of illness, and our hero took his place. The mother of the owner of the body died during childbirth. So the boy grew up with his father, who died 3 months ago. Those deep emotions that the former owner kept in his heart have never experienced before. After all, in a past life no one needed him. And even when he died in a hospital bed, no one came to him. Last month, having not yet fully understanding his new essence and the structure of this world, the hero came to the trap of the Lord or became a bait for the monster. So he found out how this world differs and what paranormal forces act in it. People who were able to achieve incredible heights through cultivation lived here. They were called masters of martial arts. However, not only people could improve themselves, even animals were engaged in this. One such creature was soon seen by a respected lord. The boat approached the river, and the tied boy looked around intently, trying to make out the mysterious creature. It was huge and began to circle under the boat, considering which side it is best to attack. Seeing the monstrous dimensions of this creature, the lord either clearly panicked. They told him that the monster was only half the human body. Obviously, even Ban Xinjiang was frightened, because the monster turned out to be too big. However, a noble warrior tried to pull himself together with all his strength. He waited for this moment for many years and could not do now. The Lord prepared to strike, in which he concluded 10 years of his training. He was sure the monster could not survive such an attack. However, at that moment, the sea monster widely revealed its mouth, deciding to swallow the unlucky master. As a result, the boat was destroyed to smithereens. All that remained Ban Xinjiang and Lian Shi was desperately clinging to the wreckage. The old man clearly panicked, not wanting to die in this damned place. His attention was attracted by the boy, barely holding onto the piece of wood next to him. Without inventing anything better, the insolent immediately pierced the young man's hand with his pocket blade, and then he pushed him to the bottom, hoping that the monster would follow the smell of blood. The boy tried his best to unravel the ropes, begging for help. However, the water monster smelled the smell of blood much earlier than the captive managed to free himself. The lungs began to gradually be filled with river water, and when the hero's gaze began to cloud, the last thing he saw was his father's face. It would be wonderful if those visions that appeared before him turned out to be true. Suddenly, floundering in the water, the young man managed to grab onto something. He was already delighted with salvation, as the monster grabbed his leg and again pulled him to the bottom. They fell into the depths for a long time until they saw many human remains at the bottom. The boy, until the last, looked at the bright light of the moon, mentally apologizing to his father for not managing to escape. After that, he fell into the water, and the water monster spun around him. The last thing the young wanderer saw was how this creature licked his huge mouth in order to swallow it. However, at that moment his whole body shone strangely. An unknown voice began checking access, and soon switched to activation. Suddenly, some jade casket shone brightly and opened access to the spiritual storage. As soon as compatibility with the hero's body was confirmed, the restoration of his essence immediately began. Of course, Liang Shi was struck by the fact that after everything that happened, he survived. He clearly remembered how in the water the monster reached for him to devour. The young man tried to pull his arms and legs, looking for support, but he realized that the resistance of the water disappeared. He could walk on the water surface like a solid ground. At this moment, an unknown system window made it clear that he received an active skill of monitoring the water flow. Only then did the boy notice that he could not only control water, but even breathe under it. It seemed to him almost impossible. In addition, all the wounds on his body in an instant dragged on. But at that moment, the monster again crept up to the hero from the back, trying to devour him. The frightened boy only shouted loudly, covering his face with his hands. However, a moment passed, but nothing happened. Opening his eyes, he noticed that the monster stopped in the water flows that he created. A system window surfaced in front of him, which he had seen more than once in various comics. As a result, the young man realized that he had no restrictions in the water. He could even control the water element. However, at this moment, the water monster began to gradually get out of its imprisonment. It became clear, even the forces of Liang Shi had their own limits. Therefore, when the water spirit tried to attack him, the hero only jumped on his face and bounced away. Obviously, he could not run away for a long time. The young man hoped to reassure this beast, and at that moment the system congratulated him on obtaining the skill, Bloody Seal of Subordination. He could draw an ancient rune with his blood to conclude a contract with a water monster. It was just what the warrior wanted to get. At this point, the spirit of an evil alligator was already rushing at him at all pairs. Controlling the water flows, Liang Shi tried to catch him and immobilize again, but this time the flows were weaker, only slowing the enemy for a moment. This time was enough for the guy to get to the enemy from the rear, after which he activated the new Bloody Seal of Subordination. Touching the head of an alligator, the wanderer left his bright golden seal there. Everything around was shone with dazzling light. The water spirit only became furious in pain. The capillaries of the young man began to burst, and crocodiles of scales began to sprout next to her eyes. Apparently, this was one of the consequences of the manifestation of such magic. The hero gradually lost his strength and even worried that he would soon lose consciousness. At that moment, he remembered how he lived in the hospital. Not wanting to repeat the same miserable life, the warrior only pushed, demanding that this miserable monster finally surrendered under his onslaught. It is not known how much time passed before the hero got to land after the dun. He stretched out on the ground with satisfaction, rejoicing that he still managed to survive. At that moment, the water spirit began to approach from the water surface. After all, he managed to tame this big man. It was the spirit of the class of water monkey, which originated from the Great Lord, capable of arousing both imperious and weak beings. Watching the crocodile looking at him with curiosity, Liang Shi asked to go into the water and wait until he needed it. The big man immediately sailed away. After all, after imposing the rune between them, a spiritual channel formed, through which the hero could contact his ward from anywhere in the world. Finally, the young warrior was going to go home to eat and indulge in a well-deserved rest. Fortunately, in the depths of consciousness, scraps of memoirs of the former owner of the body were preserved. He knew where his home was. At the same time, a mighty crocodile returned to his cave, decorated with bright colors of the lotus, like precious gems. Meanwhile, an important gentleman suddenly arrived in the village where Liang Shi lived with his family. The fishermen looked at each other with anxiously, watching the uninvited guests, because they were heading straight to the boy's house. Obviously, everyone believed that the young man had serious troubles with the madman lord, or... The boy with purple good eyes watched the comrade approaching the house. Li, or... He understood that his friend was clearly in any trouble, otherwise why would this ominous company visit him? The delegation was headed by a servant who knew very well that the boy died, and was going to take all his property to his hands. It remained only to confirm that it was precisely because of him that the mission failed. In fact, Ban Xinjiang still blamed in the failure of the Lord Or, who failed the task. Immediately after these gloomy thoughts, the man angrily knocked out the door with his foot, and with the sweetest smile, he asked the master to go to a modest hut. However, what he saw in the house made him freeze with shock. For some reason, the boy, whom he wanted to destroy, peacefully rested in his house whole and unharmed. The hero was extremely interested in that strangers forgot in his home. Obviously frightened, Ban Xinjiang was indignant that the boy survived, and his gentleman only flashed his eye into his subordinate, not understanding what was happening. Then he awkwardly pointed to a boy named Liang Shi. The servant of the Zhao family looked extremely dissatisfied, looking at the guy who turned out to be such an incredible lucky one. Then he immediately ordered his people to grab this boy. Obviously, the hero fiercely resisted, not realizing that these villains were going to do with him this time. But at that moment, Ban Xinjiang with his fist painfully hit the young man in the stomach. The old man only contemptuously explained that the lord of these lands hired a master of martial arts. Mr. Lord, or so that he would deal with the water monster poisoning the life of the village. However, Liansha somehow conspired with the monster and killed their savior. Because of this, they lost a lot of money, and the village remained in mortal danger. Liansha only indignantly from this impudent lies, because it was they who abducted him to make a bait for the monster. Ban Xinjiang ordered the hero to close his mouth, because he was a monster who dared to return to the village after the master died because of him. This nickname was clearly familiar to the strange way the monster called him in a past life due to the fact that he was an outcast. Everyone mocked him, considering a leap in an orphan who loves to steal and commit all sorts of crimes. Usually Liangsha tried to ignore it, but sometimes only viciously looked at those who humiliated him. One of the instigators only mocked his evil face, and even offered him to attack if he was not afraid. And of course, Liangsha attacked, so he was nicknamed the monster because he was uncontrollable. Of course, the young man knew that it could be risky to demonstrate his abilities, but to give up at all in his style. Therefore, first of all, he rushed at the arrogant Ban by Xinjiang, hitting his head in his stomach, after which he fell to the ground. However, the warrior understood. He would not give up, even if he had to become a real monster. He was ready to break all these miserable people for pieces. Ban Xinjiang was seriously angry that the guy dared to kick, and even offered to connect him and take him to the estate. They just lacked people for one business, and such orphans, like a hero, were perfect for them. Then the servant of the house, Zhongshen, suggested Liansha to become the adoptive son of the Lord. Then they will let him go. Otherwise, all the bones will break him. The villagers immediately began to whisper. There were rumors that those who got into the estate disappeared. Recently, a lot of people have already taken there. But suddenly an angry, senile voice rang out. The headman of the village came, who brought weather ore. The headman was extremely unhappy that someone dared to offend the baby Liangsha. Junsheng was very surprised when he saw the old man. However, he only shouted angrily that he was a legal servant of the dynasty and Shan. They could not attack a civil servant. He also made it clear that even their master was obliged to respect his status, and from their behavior he could have a heart attack. After these words, Junsheng got a lot of angry, but still could not do anything and decided to leave. In the end, he only warned the old man that the Lord would not leave this matter unpunished. So, casting threatening glances at the arrivals, they retired away. Ban Xinjiang finally measured the hero with a look, realizing that he was as ungrateful as his own father. As soon as the uninvited guests left, the elder reminded the baby that he should avoid such conflicts. Liansha was very grateful to the elder for protection, after which he either took the old man back home, and he dispersed the impatient crowd of onlookers. Left alone and looking around himself, the boy understood that this could happen to him in the future. Of course, this time the headman helped him a lot, but he could not rely on his help every day, and since he received the system, it was his chance to become truly strong. At this moment, the notification informed him that he received the evolution of the pet 0.1. He also had a system window. His little friend was in the status of immobilized. There was no money, and the percentage of merging with the water monkey was 5. For this reason, Liansha decided to visit his little beast. After the subordination of the crocodile, he could contact him through the telepathic canal at any time. As soon as he did, the water at his feet began to seethe, and soon the crocodile appeared in front of him. Looking around the baby, the hero did not understand where his gigantic version went. As it turned out, subordinate water creatures could change the size for the control of the consumed energy. In a small form, consumption was extremely low. Then Liansha realized. The size also changed thanks to his incredible system. In addition, the young warrior decided to find out from his animal how he was able to pump his level, which recently received a notification. The kid agreed to show him, so they together dived under the water and began to swim to the habitat of the crocodile. Thus, the pet brought the hero into a real grotto. Looking around, the wanderer saw on the ground various luminous plants scattered along the bottom. Only one look of them made it clear. These were unusual, legendary spiritual plants. The young man decided to touch one of them. The system invited him to absorb this plant. As it turned out, in this world there were such plants and treasures that saturate with various energies. They were called spiritual. There were rumors that in the backyard of the Zhao estate, there was a pond in which unusual water lilies grow. They attract cultivators, and they in turn become subordinates to Lord Zhao. Obviously, collecting these plants, Liansha was extremely interested in how many water essence he would be able to extract from this delicacy. He also called a little crocodile to the rescue to help him collect everything. However, the pet chose to rest. There was no time before Liansha pulled out all the plants, putting them on a stone in a cave. Finally collecting everything, he could taste this treat. After the first piece, he received a water entity that could be used to improve the merger with the water spirit, or to evolution the pitter monster. However, Liansha was more interested in how tasty it was. For this reason, he stopped eating only when he thoroughly filled his stomach. As a result, he achieved that the water entity pumped up to 25 points. and decided to spend them on a merger with a water spirit for the evolution of a monster of the Pythera. As soon as he chose pumping, energy sparkled around his body from all sides. He felt how it became stronger. This power would definitely be enough to defeat those guys who dared to attack him. In addition, now he weighed about 45 kgs more. His body could not accept more energy. Therefore, the guy decided to think about how to deal with monetary problems. Soon the winter period will begin. The crocodile will hibernate so that the hero will not be able to rely on him. However, at that moment, the fish suddenly jumped out of the water, landing at his feet. In fact, it was the work of his little friend who decided to bring the owner to eat. And at that moment, Lion Shi understood. He had a great solution on how to earn a little money selling fish. As a result, the heroes managed to help out as many as 80 coins for the fish that the faithful crocodile brought him. Local merchants were not trading machines from his former world. It was quite possible to agree on a good price with them. Now the temporarily financial problem has been resolved. It remained to come up with something regarding that unfortunate lord or... However, at that moment, from the back to the young warrior, Xin Zhang, smiling to insanity, unexpectedly approached the madness. He only apologized to the boy for the misunderstanding that happened between them a few days ago, and would like to apologize. In addition, he stopped nearby, so the old man invited the hero to dine with him. He promised that they would only be together. Of course, all this was a deception. They wanted to lure the young man into a trap in order to prevent him from escaping. However, surprisingly, the hero only laughed. Since they will be together, he was not opposed to a bite. In fact, not so long ago, Ban Xinjiang received a brutal punishment. After all, the last tests on the estate were not so good. Several people died. There were not enough healing herbs for everyone. Lion Shu was an orphan, which made him an ideal candidate. So Zheng Xian insisted that the old man deal with the task and brought the guy to them. The battered Ban Xinjiang nodded immediately, promising that this boy would not run away anymore, and he would bring him tomorrow. Zheng Xiang in turn promised that if Ban Xinjiang copes with this task, the Lord puts his word for him for important people. And of course, Ban Xinjiang was extremely grateful for a similar opportunity. He literally shook, imagining that he could soon gain immortality. He will have this incredible opportunity. Then he opened his robe, seeing the tags all over his body, and loudly yelled with joy that he could finally become one of the elect. At this time, he ate a boat calmly with the hero, only smiling peacefully and enjoying the look. In addition, it was very deserted here. The old man invited the boy to eat and solve their differences. At this moment, he added some unknown pill to the preparing broth. The hero, looking around, decided once again to ask Ban Xinjiang whether there was definitely no one else here. The man only laughed such an incredulous issue. Of course, he did not need extra ears that could hear the hero's cries after he drinks this fish soup. Lion Shu only rejoiced that Ban Xinjiang seriously prepared for this mission. Obviously, the man did not understand why suddenly the boy rose to his feet. However, the next second, controlling the water, the hero created a water bubble around his face, a villain. The old man slowly began to choke. His skin began to blue. The last thing he saw in front of him was the cold-blooded face of his tormentor. When the man came to his senses at the next moment, he found that he was already tightly connected by ropes. The hero sat not far from him, only chuckling that the old man fell asleep just like a baby. Then he showed a bag full of money. It is clear that Ban Xinjiang was paid a lot to drag him into the estate. There were about 2 linen. Of course, Ban Xinjiang was justified, making it clear that he could explain everything. And the boy only demonstrated a beautiful, familiar landscape. This was the place where they were attacked by a water monster. And at that moment, the same monster jumped behind his master. Obviously, Ban Xinjiang almost lost consciousness from the horror that he experienced at that moment. The young man calmly explained that although this crocodile was a monster earlier, now he was his pet. Then, having fallen to his knees, the old man finally realized that he had contacted the real monster. He begged that he would not eat him, in return was ready to tell the hero absolutely everything. The boy was wondering why his master wanted to lure him on the estate and why people disappeared there. As it turned out, they were all needed so that the master became immortal. He extracted the pearls of immortality from them. A similar fate was waiting for all those who entered the estate. The hero was clearly disappointed that Ban Xinjiang, knowing this, brought to death innocent people. However, he explained that he did it only because he was forced. In fact, Ban Xinjiang just tried to tighten the time, knowing that the servants of the Lord would come here, and the hero will also become one of the pearls, and will pray for death. However, the young man approximately knew what the future awaits him, so without unnecessary ceremonies, he hit a man on the head. Thus, he demonstrated his monstrous essence in complete glory. In fact, the guy understood. If he had not killed this man, he would be dragged into the estate and turned into a pearl of immortality. While he became stronger, he needed to find something that could protect him. So the following calm days passed without any persecution. Lion Shi voraciously fishing with his little friend. His water forces made life much easier. About 3 days have passed since he killed that fool. In order not to arouse suspicion, the young man arranged a fisherman's life. He woke up early in the morning, returned late and sold fish. He also did not come to the place of murder. As for the boat that he received, he told everyone a crying story, as if Ban Xinjiang gave it as an apology, and then disappeared somewhere. But the Lord's people will not believe this story so simply. The disappearance will definitely lead them to him, and by the time they visit, the young man had to become stronger. The fastest way for this is to join the martial arts clan. There were 3 clans in the city, and the strongest of them, Yin Yang clan. There were rumors that the head of the clan had such an unprecedented force that he was able to crumble gold and destroy the stones. That is why he invariably remained at the top. If Lian Shi managed to join them, the Zhao family would not dare to touch him. In the end, his loss would inevitably bring great trouble to the clan. However, the introductory fee cost from 5 to 8,000 linen. At the moment, he had only 280 coins, so it was necessary to find another type of earnings. Hearing the restless thoughts of the master, the crocodile only yawned sleepily. The animal amused that he was thinking so much about the future. The hero pleased at least the fact that after his last pumping, he felt how it became stronger. The power of reason, it seems, also grew. Perhaps now it could control up to 2 creatures at the same time. But now he needed to return to his fishing, and he noticed that gradually the movement in the water became more familiar. Suddenly he offered a crocodile to swim race. Recently, he often loved to train with him in this way. During this time, he also learned to twist a stream around his feet, which pushes it, giving an impulse. However, this required increased control, so he was tired faster. At the moment, no one could compare with him in speed, so he thought until he was overtaken by the red luminous fish. From one glance at her, it was clear. She was mystical. In the world, yes, some creatures evolved, accidentally absorbing spiritual energy. Such monsters were called mystical fish. In addition, there were 2 such fish here. The hero was delighted. Usually, this creature was very difficult to see. When the fish began to hastily float away, Lian Shi immediately asked for help from a friend. The kid took his reinforced shape and rushed to the fish on the one hand, while Lian Shi rushed from the other. Of course, a fishing network would be very useful now, but nothing was at hand. He wanted to at least catch them and drive them out. Getting close enough, the guy tried to influence the fish with a water flow. And in the end, the fish really got stuck, being in the water bubble. So Lian Shi managed to get closer and take her in his hands. But at that moment, the enemy was already more serious about him. The hero did not even have time to rejoice that today he could sell the fish for a fairly round sum. Already in a moment, his mustache, a huge monster, grabbed the young man, ticking to the bottom. Then Liang Shi was able to fully consider his terrifying fanged face. Once the guy heard about Soma Ludeta, who scoured along the bottom of this river. He was very unlucky that he came across him. In addition, the warrior saw how he now collected something like a bubble, about to attack it. The hero immediately activated the force of the water flow, trying to destroy this water shell. He managed to do this. Besides, he surprised himself a lot of Som Ludoid himself. The guy was glad that his reflexes were faster than that of predatory fish. However, at the same second, turning, the monster tried to attack the young warrior. It would seem that with its powerful emissions, it literally mocked human weakness. But at the same moment, Somu flew a crushing blow from the faithful defender of the hero. The crocodile quickly clung to the neck of this product of water depths, preventing him from escaping. Liang Shi decided to take advantage of this precious chance in order to impose a submission contract. If he does not subordinate this monster, he will definitely die from his ruthless fangs. Therefore, the young man imposed a bloody seal, hoping that the strength of the mind was enough for this powerful creature. Anxious warnings arose immediately. The system reported that the master should stop immediately. What he did could cause a destructive mental overload, because his strength of reason was disastrously not enough. In case of failure, a terrible reverse reaction could arise, capable of breaking his consciousness into parts. However, despite all the formidable warnings, the guy did not stop. His will was adamant, like hardened steel. Soon the fierce gaze of the sea monster gradually began to cloud, losing his primitive ferocity. As soon as the painful procedure ended, the exhausted warrior immediately got out on the saving land. He rejoiced that he still managed to defeat the enemy. Hardly anyone could have imagined that Kos would so desperately resist the magical effect. Lian Shi almost lost control of himself, his consciousness balanced on the verge of madness. However, the result was worth it. Now he had 2 loyal little friends, ready to fight to the last drop of blood. The system immediately invited the guy to accumulate 800 precious points in order to turn catfish into tiger. However, Lian Shi had not yet had sufficient funds for this, so for starters he decided to check his rich catch. At that moment, his faithful friend brought him and another mystical fish, transfusing all pink colors. Therefore, Liang Shi immediately affectionately stroked his assistant on the head of his assistant in order to properly praise for his efforts. Soon, right on a swinging boat, the hero divorced a small bonfire. He chose the smallest of mystical fish in order to check how his inner power will change after such a meal. As a result, he earned from only a dish of as many as 18 points of the water entity. He would have received about so much if he had eaten as many as 18 spiritual plants. Lianshu also understood that if he eats a larger fish, he could raise 3 times more points and easily bring the percentage of merging to the cherished 10. However, he will clearly have to tolerate if he wanted to accumulate on an entrance fee to a prestigious clan. So, at the end of this event, saturated by the events, the hero acquired a lot of valuable fish, and also a new pet, who was warmly called Chonka. Soon after the end of the successful fishing, Liangshu went to the noisy market of their small town. However, to surprise, there were incredibly many people in the market at that time. It seemed very strange, given that only recently they ended in a colorful festival. As it turned out, everyone gathered in order to look at the outlandish mystical fish weighing 1.2 kilograms, which was caught by one of the local fishermen. Having become interested, Liangshu immediately began to squeeze out in a dense crowd in order to look at this legendary fish. Turning to the crowd of onlookers, the hero proudly announced that their port seems to be blessed by the river god, since they caught 2 mystical fish in one day. Other fishermen were only indignantly indignant. What does he say such nonsense because the boy caught only 1 fish? However, the hero did not speak about him at all. Then he showed people a beautiful pinkish fish sparkling like a precious stone. But the crowd only burst into a mocking laugh, believing that the guy took some ugly fish for mystical. They even considered that he is specifically trying to fill the price of his miserable product. The fellow villagers began to mock him viciously, their voices merged into a humiliating choir. However, one of the local aristocrats came up at this intense minute, noticing a red perch in the hands of a fisherman. This man was the elder of the battle clan by Yang named Hu Qi. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the market. He wanted to purchase this fish and courteously learn from the young seller how much it costs. However, unfortunately, an inexperienced fisherman had no idea what price for this rare fish would be fair. Considering that she weighed impressive 1,200 grams, Ko generously decided to purchase it for 150 hairdries. It was a truly cosmic amount for a simple fisherman. He immediately joyfully agreed to sell her, not believing his incredible luck. But at this decisive moment, Liangshu politely asked that the respected Hu Q would look at his modest fish. The fisherman only mocked contemptuously, warning that if Lian Shi is angry with his miserable fish of invenerable elder, then he would not be greeted. They even considered his behavior completely unscrupulous and impudent. However, at that moment, in the pinkish fish, Hu Qi, with amazement, recognized the rare bull bream. The fisherman only smiled, calmly explaining to him that this fish weighed more than 1.5 kilograms. And then a respected guy decided to purchase her at a price twice as much as the same, for the breathtaking 325 hairdries. The crowd immediately buzzed like a worried hive. After all, their families for several generations could not accumulate such a fabulous amount of money. The rest were whispered ominously that the hero clearly would not live long enough in order to have time to spend this amount. As a result, Lian Shi easily sold his happy copy, feeling like a real jewelry merchant. At this time, his friend Bunch was about to leave, realizing that his modest product would not interest anyone after such an enchanting performance. Bowing with reverence, Liangshu decided to find out from the wise master why his fish cost twice as many red bloody perch. As it turned out, the horns of bull bream are widely used in high medicine. Rare pills are made from it that increase endurance and help with stagnation of blood. This fish was useful in itself, like a living pharmacy of nature. The hero was very happy that he still guessed to leave the skeleton of this magical creature as a precious souvenir. Soon he was already sitting in a secluded place, counting the sonorous coins received for this amazing fish with trepidation. At this solemn moment, his faithful friend Li, who was clearly proud of the incredible fishing abilities of Liang Shi, unexpectedly visited the guy. Now the whole city whispered about him, passing the legend of the young man who caught mystical fish from the mouth to the mouth. Then the boy remembered that he had completely forgotten to thank his friend for the generous that he did for him last time. Li only smiled slyly, playfully offering Lian Shi as an apology to give him all the money earned for mythical fish. The hero only frowned, after which he decided to find out from the friend how much money is required for joining the illustrious Yang clan. He found the most suitable person for such a question. After all, whether his parents or just the same were going to send him there in the near future. In short, 350 hamples are required for a simple entry. If he wants to accommodate there with comfort, it will take 500 already. And if he is going to live there, eat, and use all other benefits, then all 1,000 hairdries. It was more than in other clans, but for good reason they were considered the best in the entire district. Lian Shi quickly calculated. If you add all its accumulations, then it will have 455 hairdries. This is quite enough for the usual entry. so he enthusiastically invited the guy to go and together to sign up for the clan. Lee either laughed good-naturedly, because he had never before noticed that their modest friend was quite rich in such ambitious plans. However, while they joked carelessly, the sensitive hearing Lion Shi caught suspicious sounds somewhere far away, which made him be alert. At this very time, events moved to the gloomy dungeon of the Zhao estate. Jun Xiang came with an alarming report to his formidable master. Their subordinate Ban Xinjiang failed like through the ground, as if the underworld herself absorbed him. But having tracked his last movements, they realized that the last time he met with a boy named Liang Shi. The arrogant chapter considered this an insufficient occasion to bother his precious time. He imperiously demanded that Zhongxiang deal with this matter on his own. At the same time, the guy himself peacefully prepared dinner, being in his boat near a quiet river. Soon he was ready for a beautiful fish soup, the aroma of which spread over the water surface. As soon as he tried him, he realized how wonderful his fragrance was. His little friends even liked the soup, so the hero immediately generously poured a bowl to himself, allowing them to enjoy this luxurious food. At that moment, the hero's water essence increased by another 24 units. In addition, the influx of energy was simply incredible. This is exactly what we should have expected after the test of the legendary mystical fish. In addition, Lion Shi became tangibly stronger. His muscles were filled with new power. In the near future, he decided to look for another such fish in order to eat it and multiply his abilities. At this point, just the time came to raise his level. He already had a lot of points. This allowed him to significantly increase the level of his strength. At this moment, the merger of the merger reached almost 12%, and it also required 800 points to pump his water creatures. Feeling a powerful surge of strength, the guy really wanted to compete with someone in combat skill. In addition, he noticed that his skill of monitoring the flow of water improved significantly, became more accurate and destructive. Liang Shi also noticed an amazing thing. After he fed his pets a little soup, the glasses that were required for their evolution decreased. Now it took not 800, but only 799 points. In addition, the hero learned to call a mysterious small box. It was not clear where it came from and who was created by these skilled hands. On one side of this mysterious casket was depicted a magnificent dragon yin. On the second, some huge monkey with burning eyes. On the third side, there was a deity with human heads and snake bodies, and on the latter, a mysterious emperor in fluttering black robes. However, no matter how much the hero was thinking about this, his thoughts turned out to be completely useless. Therefore, he decided so far to forget about it, because tomorrow he will go to the famous Yang clan to become stronger and finally deal with this nasty Zhao family. This is how they agreed. He and his faithful comrade on a creaky wagon went on a long way. It is not known how much time passed on the road, but having arrived at the place, they already enjoyed the picturesque views of the majestic city of Pignan with admiration. Of course, first of all, young travelers tried colorful local dishes, and also plunged into the whirlpool of various entertainment of a magnificent city. However, in one of the dark nooks they were already waiting for their insidious enemies. They heard very well that the boy Liang Shi was going to sign up for the illustrious clan Yang. In addition, yesterday he sold fish already for the breathtaking 325 hairdries. Such fabulous wealth. These miserable villains would not have managed to earn such an amount of money, even if they sold their own wives in the slave market. However, the accomplices perfectly understood that the boy was unlikely to give such a huge amount, simply frightened by their threats. But the leader was absolutely sure. Spending money on training was a waste of time, and they will nobly help the guy use these funds with greater benefit. And finally they saw two friends who approached the sinister gateway. Lee already thought out loud about how many people he could crush after he finishes all his training in the clan. Lion Shi was amazed at the indomitable enthusiasm of his friend. Even he was not sure that he would cope with at least a couple of hardened villains. And this ominous couple from the alley suddenly jumped on them, like predatory animals from an ambush. The leader reminded Liang Shi that they had seen each other in the market earlier, and courteously invited the guy to calmly give him all his money without unnecessary noise. However, the young warrior only smiled coldly, making it clear that he was not going to give them anything just like that. The bandits immediately considered that the hero begs for a serious thrashing and a painful lesson. However, as soon as one of them approached quite closely, Lion Shi awarded him with a crushing blow, from which even his teeth sprinkled, sparkling in the air like pearls. Then he dared to attack the other rude, daring to call Liang Shi a despicable rat. However, in the end, the fate of the second robber ended just as sadly. Grabbing this man by his fat hair, the hero immediately threw him on a comrade who was still standing on trembling legs. Using their shock and confusion, the warrior began to attack, beating opponents with all his inhuman force. Whether or all this time he stood, not knowing how to react to such a sight. His friend was so strong that he finished this unequal battle for only 9 lightning movements. The hero was also amazed that his strength increased so much after all recent adventures. A friend was eager to know how much the hero had become so strong. It seemed that he did not even need a teacher. Trying to somehow lie believable, Lian Shi only modestly explained that since childhood he was largely genius from nature. Then he offered to hurry, otherwise they could be late for important registration. However, obviously none of those present believed his strange excuses. Soon the guys at the majestic walls of the school were greeted by Xianchan Sona, who politely asked to call him an older brother. Then he decided, bowing, to take the guys to the place of registration. There they had to carefully evaluate their abilities, as well as more details about the glorious traditions of their clan. Along the way, Xian Chansong also presented them with the older brother Hu, a student of the Master of Yang. However, suddenly Lian Shi noticed a friend of a person who bought a fish from him. Hu Qi was clearly surprised to see a familiar face in the walls of the clan, and Xian Chansun was extremely interested in where the respected older brother Hu knew this modest man. Then Hu Qi calmly explained that recently he took advantage of the healing properties of a bull bream for self-improvement and bought this precious fish just from this younger brother. Rejoicing that these two found a common language, Xian Chan Sleep suggested making Hu Qi as a teacher of 2 friends, and also generously allowed them to spend the night in the walls of the school. As soon as the boys bowed respectfully, Brother Hu led them along. He found out what their natural talent for martial arts was. Obviously, both guys looked very confused before the upcoming test. However, Hu Qi asked them not to worry. It was just a formal test, necessary to choose the right style of their cultivation. Lian Shi only honestly explained that they did not fully understand what cultivation was, so they asked her older brother to explain the foundations of this art. Thinking for a moment, the wise mentor said that the warrior's path consists of 4 sacred stages: leather, flesh, bones, and blood. At the skin stage, the body becomes more powerful than that of a wild will, which significantly increases protection against enemy attacks. At the stage of the flesh, physical strength increases in an incredible number of times. Lifting an adult with one hand will become easier than simple children's entertainment. At the bone stage, the warrior will be able to accumulate internal energy, which will reduce the stones with bare hands, like brittle nuts. And finally, at the stage of blood, their body will reach the very top of human development, surpassing all conceivable limits. However, all this can be summarized by the only word: cultivation. No matter how much a person cultivates, the body will always have natural limits. And in order to overcome them, 2 integral things are needed: technology and special potions. It was by techniques that he had in mind the methods of cultivation. For example, in the Yang clan, the Phoenix Flame technique is common. If everything is done correctly, anyone can master it over time. However, Lian Shi was more interested in hearing about mysterious drugs. One could imagine that technology is a staircase, slippery and dangerous. To climb it quickly and safely, reliable railing will be needed. That's just such railing, and these very drugs were, for example, the bull bream that the hero sold him. The young warrior admired his abilities. He could easily get another similar fish using the magic of water. Looking at the obviously excited brothers, Hu Qi softly asked them not to rush. They were still at the very beginning of the long journey. They will need to concentrate at every step, gradually accumulating power. An obviously grateful hero immediately asked that the wise older brother determine their natural talents and abilities. At this time, watching the arrivals arrived, 3 sinister guys sat in the shade. They received a special order for one of these boys. Of course, the order was from the powerful Zhao family, specifically from Zhao Haiyuan, who asked the fighters to take these guys over the territory of the clan. With the rest of the affairs, the Lord would have figured out himself, with his ruthless methods. Shortly before this, Zhao Haiyuan overheard the conversation when Zhong Xian told his master about Liang Shi, who was the perfect material for the manufacture of Indifference of Immortality. In addition, the boy was the same age as the young master and an orphan. If they could get him, the condition of the young heir would improve significantly. Mr. Zhao himself only sighed heavily. His son was weak from birth, and finding suitable material for the Pearl of Immortality was extremely not easy. Lian Shi came up perfectly, but according to rumors, this boy was going to join the Yang clan. Knowing the harsh character of the head of the clan, it will be difficult for them to make their move openly. Therefore, Zhongshang left, trying to think about what could be done in this situation. At that moment, the eavesdropping He Yuan first saw a portrait of the hero. He knew very well how much he needed the Pearls of Immortality to save life. Therefore, the young man swore that anyone who would stand in his way would inevitably die. Soon the test ended, but the magical structure of Liang Shu was at the highest level, even whether it was either on average. A friend was convinced the guy probably gave a bribe to some of the examiners. However, Liang Shu tried to explain that he simply had a natural talent for martial arts. after which he invited his comrade as soon as possible to return to the training parade ground. However, suddenly in front of them they saw a familiar young fisherman named Chen Jin Chan. Lee immediately decided to carefully ask the guy that he had forgotten here. However, having exchanged all a couple of words, they immediately clung to each other. As soon as Lian Shi restrained them so that they would not fight right here, the hero sighed calmly, after which Chen Jin Chana greeted the friendly. He was 2 years older. Lian Shi was a capable fisherman and good acquaintances of the past of the owner of this body. The warrior quickly realized that it looked like an older brother also decided to train in this clan. Obviously, he really wanted to become strong because he had been selling fish for a long time in order to accumulate on an entry fee, and he finally succeeded. For this reason, Lian Shi friendly invited his older brother to go to the parade ground with them. There they had to wait for them to start the first classes. Therefore, they all immediately hurried and soon reached a spacious parade ground, where at that time experienced warriors were diligently engaged. However, newcomers were already given a very difficult training. Sweat poured with streams. Glory to the gods, soon Huchi declared a long-awaited break. He asked the fighters to go for lunch, and then continue the training with the teacher Lu. All as if nothing had happened went to eat, while 3 friends were so exhausted that they could barely stand on their legs, trembling from fatigue. However, the guys suddenly approached them noticed that from this trinity it was very much carried by fish. Apparently, their past still made itself felt. Among them was just the same hired instigator of the fight, who roughly asked these guys to get out of the clan because they spoiled his impeccable authority. However, he promised, if each of them pays at least 100 hairdryers, then perhaps they will be allowed to stay in the sacred walls. Immediately rebel or jump to his feet, ready to brutally cut such an impudent. However, Chen Jin Chan stopped him, asking not to defeat the honor of his older brother who. Lian Shi, glancing at the opponents, was not sure if he had the strength to deal with these 3 at the same time. At this intense moment, the instigator realized that the guys were not averse to fighting, and was only glad to measure their strength. After all, he almost reached the first stage, skin, and wanted to try his increased power. After hearing, the hero was clearly nervous. If they fought in the water, he would have at least some advantages in this unequal battle. However, at this intense moment, the imperious voice of the back called out all this trinity. It was the older brother of who strictly ordered everyone to immediately disperse. And if they so wanted to find out the relationship, it was better to stand in the bar for half an hour allotted for a holy break. Of course, the instigator grumbled displeasedly, but understood that this trinity was simply incredibly lucky with the defender. But he ominously warned that the next time the older brothers would not be nearby. After that, with the sweetest smile, like angels in the flesh, the violators of calm went to fulfill the instructions given to them by the wise older brother of who. Looking after them, Li or only evil cursed. Although Chen Jin Chan understood, the curses in the back would not change the situation. What happened now has become another convincing evidence that it is necessary to become stronger, and as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the hero urgently warned his friends that he needed to run away home for important matters. And running away simultaneously, he asked to come up with some reasonable excuse before the teacher, who would conduct an evening training. Li or Chen Jin Chan only looked at each other perplexedly, obviously not understanding what this strange day was full of mysterious events. In fact, at that moment, his small faithful wards gave the hero a danger signal and desperately asked him to come to the Lotus Pond. A powerful enemy appeared there, threatening them with a calm existence. In the late evening, 2 comrades left the magnificent Yang clan. Lian Shi never returned, but Li either understood. The guy probably had serious reasons that he did not have to know about. After these thoughts, these 2 again almost fought right at the sacred walls of the clan. However, suddenly they heard the approaching ominous steps. It was the same bully who smiled viciously, rejoicing in luck. He met with these panties without protection. Now there was no older brother who next to them, and certainly no one will help them. The scoundrel promised to personally crush these 2 miserable worms. Lian Shi at this time was in cool water with his little friends. Looking at them, the hero realized that Tao and Chonky practically reached the peak of the skin stage. Their strength increased significantly. Nevertheless, something so frightened them that they called him to the rescue. Therefore, the warrior was eager to know what kind of terrifying creature it was. Looking at the deep recesses in the sand that it left, it became obvious. It was clearly some monstrous thunder of incredible sizes. At this moment, the kids immediately decreased from fright, like leaves in the wind. The hero understood. After the last pumping of his merger, the percentage of merger increased to impressive 11.7%. Now he could control up to 35 liters of water, and his radius of sensitivity also increased to 6 meters. Therefore, the young magician better began to feel the water space around him. So he felt where he was the monster who so frightened his faithful guys. It was a crab of huge sizes that eagerly absorbed spiritual plants in their sacred pond. It seems that this creature also had a developed mind. Once the wise Huchi said that any animal that has passed the skin stage becomes mystical. And judging by the impressive size of this crab, his words turned out to be prophetic. Although it is unlikely that this crab was too strong, otherwise his little pets would not have been able to escape from him alive. However, Liang Shi doubted that he would be able to easily deal with this monster. After all, he did not even have a thoughtful plan of attack. Of course, he would like to stand step by step stronger, gradually accumulating power. However, accidents and deadly dangers have always been an integral part of his thorny path. This has been proved more than once by those people who attacked him in every possible way for the slightest reason. The young man knew, cardinal changes in life always require risk. Really significant things often happen by accident, and what is planned in advance usually does not have any deep meaning. Liang Shi was not ready to dutifully put up with his fate. If the life of a wanderer gave him a chance of greatness, he had to grab him with an iron grip for him. He already proved this when Ban Xinjiang, who tried to take this chance from him, was dead. So if this impudent crab wanted to capture his lotus pond, then the monster was supposed to show which of them is truly stronger. Immediately, having felt the unbending determination of their master, his pets accepted their true size. As a result, they all together fiercely attacked their powerful enemy, ready to fight to the last drop of blood. At this time, the battle unfolded not only with the hero, his friends also fought for life. When the scoundrel brutally beat the guys, he decided with a mockery to find out where their mysterious friend went. However, at this critical second, Chen Jin-chan groped a stone lying near him. With all his might, he hit the guy with this stone in front of him in order to fight off his ruthless attacks. But as it turned out, thanks to the skin stage, the blow did not cause any damage to the enemy. The man himself only got angry, and his feet began to press Chen Jin-chan into the cold land. Looking at them with hatred, he made it clear that they themselves dug their grave with such daring behavior. Then he ordered the top 3 his assistants to follow the gates while he would have fun with these 2 miserable worms. Li either was furious from the fact that these guys dared to attack them, and tried to give a decent change. However, the enemy so easily intercepted his hand that he instantly turned it out. The villain decided to shut up a boy who loved to wave his fists and did not understand when to strategically retreat. After which he returned to Chen Jin-chan, his daring gaze even despite the cruel beating very much. Therefore, the villain decided to groan his eyes so that Chen Jin-chan could no longer train as he wanted. Li only screamed desperately, ordering this monster to stop immediately. However, at that moment, the finger was already approaching the eyes of Chen Jin-chan, starting to slowly press them. Liang Shi still continued to fiercely fight with a mighty crab. The monster attacked with the help of stones crushed in its iron claws. In addition, the shell of this monster was as if generally impenetrable. The blows bounced off without the slightest effect. Then the hero turned to Tao for help, so that he would pick up the enemy's claws. After which the warrior tried to use the control of the water flow on the monster itself. However, his psyche gradually became more and more overloaded, because of which he began to lose precious control. At that moment, the crab freed his claw, after which he covered his vulnerable face. However, Assam Nuclear has already swiftly flew into him again. At that moment, as the crab sorted out with his paws, trying to run away from the angry catfish, he began to damage the sacred spiritual plants. Liang Shi became furious and immediately flew into the sea robber. However, from a powerful collision, only blood poured out of his mouth with a stream. After such impudence, Liang Shi understood. He certainly cannot leave this impudent alive. Therefore, the young man began to search his huge body with a gaze in the search for at least one weak spot. In parallel, he naturally had to fight back from multiple deadly attacks. Fortunately, little friends in every possible way helped the master to avoid critical blows. Then Liang Shi noticed an important detail. No matter how he threatened the crab, he always instinctively defended the lower part. So the belly is his weak place, and the warrior prepared for the reception, which he trained for a long time. With him, he needed to focus the maximum possible amount of water pressure on the tip of his spear. With the current volume of mental energy, he will be able to give only 2 twisting turns. But this is enough to speed up the spear at least 3 times. Therefore, he continued to strengthen the spear, concentrating all his will. The system, on the other hand, was desperately shouted anxious signals. After all, the owner's psychic energy was at a critically low level. He risked completely losing control of his pets. However, the hero will never give up against the one who captured his sacred pond. As a result, he attacked with only one thought: to recapture his lotus pond. The attack landed right where necessary. The mighty body of a crab, like butter, pierced the spear through and through. All that the hero managed was only to rejoice at his brilliant victory before he began to lose consciousness from exhaustion. When he woke up next time, he ended up in a familiar cave. Next to him were his 2 faithful kids. He immediately affectionately stroked them, thanking them for pulling him out of cold water. However, the hero's head was mercilessly split in pain. He decided not to resort to such a suicide technique without extreme necessity. But suddenly the warrior realized that the huge crab was now with him on the shore. Obviously, he was wondering why the kids pulled this dead crab on land. However, he immediately understood. There was a lot of water essence in him, which was extremely necessary for him for development. At this moment, Tao began to indicate an abdomen of defeated crab. It became obvious that this crab was a female. The hero decided to look under the shell and found that there was a precious caviar. In addition, he could try to tame her. Let him have nothing to do with a large crab, but her kids sat inside these eggs. Perhaps the hero would be able to subjugate them with the help of his bloody sign. For this reason, grabbing a sharp stone, he put a deep incision on his hand. And then he activated the sign of bloody submission, putting a bloodied hand to the caviar. As a result, the magic symbol remained on it, so it seems that everything worked according to an ideal plan. And just at this magical moment, a little crab hatched from his caviar, and the system solemnly congratulated him on the acquisition of a new pet. Soon the hero began his royal dinner from a defeated crab. While he enjoyed the meal, his merger gradually increased, filling his body with incredible power. Soon, when the feast was completed, it reached a merger equal to 36.6% impressive. From such a monstrous power overwhelming him, even a ferocious Som human was frightened and a bit retreated. Lion Shi, looking around his transformed body, realized that during this time his wounds were completely dragged on, as if they had never been. And also due to the fact that his percentage of merger increased significantly, he earned even more precious water essence. Now the warrior could even feel the pulsating energy of his blood flowing through the veins. According to the wise words of the older brother Hu, at such a pace he will be able to not only surpass the skin stage but also go further along the path of improvement. After that, the hero decided to generously feed his faithful kids to the remnants of meat and eggs, which gave 6 points of water essence each. His new little friend, whom he warmly called Clash, the warrior decided not to force cannibalism. It seemed too cruel for such a sweet creature. In addition, this baby was already very charming, frolicking on his shoulder like a little angel. Having played plenty with his pets, Liang Shi thought about the fact that he would soon become a full-fledged member of the famous Yang clan. When he reaches the peak of the skin stage, the Zhao family will not be able to make anything to him with his dirty methods. In the meantime, he needed to rush to return to the morning training so as not to arouse suspicion among mentors. At this time, the sinister bulk continued to mercilessly tormenting his helpless victims. He calmed down only when a mentor approached him, forcing him to stop this cruel reprisal. The teacher recalled that each student of the Yang clan must strictly follow the sacred rules of this venerable institution. However, the boy boldly asked that the mentor did not blame him. He just complied with the direct orders of the young Mr. Zhao. After that, the insolent decided to maliciously recognize the mentor from what rules he preferred to follow, the rules of the clan, or still the will of the powerful Zhao family. Looking at the alarming reaction of the mentor, the villains only laughed contemptuously. The teacher left their family and, it seems, completely forgot who was his true master. It is unlikely that he would have achieved such heights if their generous gentleman had not sheltered both the mentor himself and his elderly father. Therefore, the bandits asked him to remain a quiet and humble Shavka. He could not even stand up for himself. The leader maliciously recalled that the father of this eccentric was still in the Zhao estate, but offered his help, for example, to put in a word for him to help his parent. The man understood that no matter what happened to him, he must protect his family at all costs. Therefore, he had to humiliately apologize to these disgusting villains. The whole company immediately burst into a mocking laugh, praising a good dog and calling it a despicable Shavka. However, at that moment, a spit from Chen Jin-chan flew on the face of a bully. Despite the fact that he lost sight of one eye, he did not care. He could not silently look at such a vile man who humiliates a worthy mentor. However, the guy immediately decided to brutally take revenge. But instead of continuing to torment Chen Jin-chan, he directed all his boiling anger at Li or Li Li. Screaming viciously, the villain suggested Chen Jin to Chan and continued to build himself a hero. He will not touch him, but he will arrange a worse torture, fully playing his younger friend. Obviously, Chen Jin-chan immediately screamed desperately, demanding that this geek would not touch his comrade with his dirty hands. However, this very geek understood. No matter how loudly he screams, no one would come to his aid. The elder brother Hu was here, and no one will intercede for them. However, the villain did not have time to finish it to the end, as his comrades suddenly flew away, like ragdolls. After that, behind him he saw someone frightening silhouette. A hero appeared who immediately examined his friends beaten to unconscious. At that moment, he literally trembled with rage, which overwhelmed him to the edges. Looking at the enemy, the warrior vowed that he would knock him all his teeth to one, and this would be a mild punishment for his deed. Behind all this from afar, the recently arrived HAIs, along with his wise master, watched. Of course, Hu-Chi took all the blame on himself. He was too carried away by the celebration of the achievement of the Peak of Blood, and therefore was late. But he could not imagine that the mentor was such a cold-blooded person that he was indifferently looking at this atrocities. However, the master understood that this man simply restrained a lot in himself. In fact, he was very kind and noble. That is why he could not reach the peak of the skin stage. A warrior without courage and determination is like a lifeless body incapable of growth. Obviously, Hu-Chi understood. They needed to help the younger brothers. They only entered their clan, and their opponent has almost reached the stage of peak of the skin. They definitely can't cope with him in an open battle. However, the master still interested something in the guy who appeared. He felt a powerful energy of blood from him, which seemed extremely intriguing to him for such a young age. At that moment, Zadir only laughed contemptuously, realizing that he was facing some kind of joker. Who can harm him at all? However, the hero was only more angry with his arrogant ridicule. Having drove off, Liang Shi quickly rushed into battle, like an angry tiger. The leader ordered his guys to grab this impudent small fisherman. However, the warrior, easily evading their awkward blows, led all these small bipods from the game in one fell swoop. Now there is a turn of the one who mocking his dear friends most of all. However, the villain mocked. Even if Liang Shi was able to deal with his comrades, this does not mean at all that he will cope with him. After all, he was a man who reached the peak of the skin stage. So between these two, a fierce battle ensued. At some point, intercepting the initiative, the hero managed to powerfully hit the guy on the jaw right from the bottom up. He immediately began to bury blood from all possible places, and Liang Shi just began to scan away contemptuously over such a weakling. Get angry, the bullying without a few teeth rushed to the hero with a blade. He intended to kill this filthy fisherman, who dared to build from himself God knows who. Now he knew. No one would stand up to the guy, because he was just an orphan who has no one to count on. However, stopping the blade with his hand, the hero was convinced that his opponent was really a dishonest scum. In addition, to attack with a blade on an unarmed sign of a worthless and disgusting coward. As a result, his next attack was so crushing that the guy immediately fell on the cold floor, as if knocked down. When the villain came to his senses, he immediately demanded that Liang Shi do not approach him. He also demanded that the mentor of Li immediately intervened. After all, right now before his eyes attacked his student. And in the end, before the hero managed to kill someone in the heat of battle, the master of the academy himself intervened. After which he called the names of all the instigators of this shameful fight and shamefully expelled them from the academy forever. He also turned to Li Mentor, explaining that he would wait for him in the Solitude Hall. After all, they had a very serious conversation about his behavior. At that moment, having calmed down, the hero began to press bleeding wounds. Looking at the master, he could not believe that the very legendary head of the School of Martial Arts stood in front of him. Liang Shi was extremely ashamed, because he violated the rules right in front of him. Now he will definitely be kicked out of the clan. However, he could not do anything when this dishonest man attacked his friends. At this moment, the master went to the boy in order to find out his name. Then, with a good-natured smile, suggested Liang Shi to become his personal student. Looking at the hand that the old man handed him to him, the young man could not believe that all this was happening with him. Soon, events moved to the sacred territory of the Yang estate. Everyone whispered that the master took the 9th student, besides a very pretty and talented boy. By this moment, one of the maids came to the young master. She handed him ceremonial clothes from older sisters and brothers, and decided to help him get dressed. However, the hero took his clothes, politely abandoning the help of beautiful girls. At this point, 2 weeks have passed since his fight with that scoundrel. Their wounds quickly dragged on thanks to the special treatment of Master Yan, and now Liang Shi was no longer lonely. He had a wise master, as well as many older brothers and sisters. So now when he gained strength and has recovered, it's time to take revenge on the damn Zhao family. At this time, Hu-Chi still told his friends about that epic fight with the participation of his younger brother. He could not imagine that the guy who only joined the clan could defeat a person who has practically reached the peak of the skin stage. The rest of the senior students only laughed at his brother Hu. He told this exciting story for the 2nd week. Apparently, this guy, who liked the master at first sight, was really very special. At that moment, the 5th sister approached the 4th older brother, believing that the boy was jealous. The master paid such attention to their younger student. However, he only explained that he respectfully treated the hero and even handed him his precious tungsten armor. At that moment, while laughing, they discussed the exploits of Liang Shi. He just left his room. However, the guy really could not recognize. He was dressed in expensive clothes, decorating his appearance and emphasizing nobility. In addition, Liang Shi was sincerely glad to see the older brothers and sisters. He immediately bowed respectfully, thanking these good people for the generous gifts that were handed to him. However, as it turns out, one of the brothers had not yet managed to give the hero his gift. It was something special. Tungsten steel ingot! The young man could go to the blacksmith and order which weapon wants to forge. Of course, the hero accepted the gift with deep gratitude. Then the students decided to go on the road so as not to force their wise master to wait. Events at this time moved to the gloomy estate of Zhao. Soon, Zhongshan came to the master in order to report the disappointing news. The body of Bansin Jinan still managed to find. However, the contents of his abdomen completely disappeared, as if someone had gutted him. Fury of the Zhao family was like a spewing volcano. The evil patriarch brought down all his hatred on the shaking subordinate, striking the blow. Each of his fists resembled Zhong Xian about the nightmare that awaits them if government officials reveal their secret experiments. As soon as they knock the estates at the door, and the heads will roll on the marble floor like ripe fruits. The unfortunate servant desperately tried to justify himself, shouting through the pain that that damned boy, Liang Shi, was to blame for all their troubles. It is his hands stained with blood, Ban Xinjiang. However, these words only strengthened the rabies of the master. At this point, rumors have already reached him that the young Jump became a personal student of the head of the Yang clan himself. Now it was not to approach him. Any attempt to harm the guy will turn into a meeting with the tip of the blade of the legendary master. Through the gritted teeth, the head of the family hissed a warning. Zhongxiang should find the thing that was hidden in the dead man's stomach at all costs. And the patriarch himself has already begun to bear plans for how to get rid of this unbearable obstacle in the guise of a teenager. Meanwhile, all students of the academy gathered in the sacred halls of the estate Yang. On the honorary throne, the head of the clan himself sat next to his noble wife, radiating the aura of unshakable wisdom. The master frankly admitted that Liang Shi showed himself as a brave and adamant young man, and now he wants to find out whether he is ready to accept the honor of becoming his student. The hero's heart was full of boundless gratitude when he, with a deep bow, accepted this invaluable proposal. The mentor's voice sounded solemnly and edifying. Having joined the clan, the new student undertakes to keep subnibrous and unshakable discipline to show proper respect to the mentors and senior comrades. He should not harm those who are weaker than him, or abuse his position in order to achieve selfish goals. Each word of the master crashed into memory of the young man like the commandments carved in stone. The hero solemnly accepted all these sacred rules of the clan, understanding their deep meaning. Now there was only the last action. As soon as Lian Shi dragging the ritual bowl of tea, he will officially become the 9th personal student of the master. From this moment, the mentor himself will become his patron, and no one will dare to more unfairly offend the orphan. At the same time, training of other students continued with the previous intensity. Soon they were given the long-awaited respite for half an hour, allowing them to take their breath and relax the strained muscles. Many ardently discussed the new student of Liang Shi, who so unexpectedly became the personal ward of their master. It was especially pleased that the company of that arrogant bully was in shame to be expelled from the clan. However, many secretly suspected that some influential master or family clearly stood behind the actions of this Bolvan. At that moment, a young gentleman slowly walked along the paved paths, whose face clearly expressed dissatisfaction with the fresh news that he had just heard. The hero at that time talked with his older brother Hu Qi, eagerly absorbing knowledge about 4 barriers and 7 sacred ways of improvement. Until now, the young man has heard only about the barriers of the skin, flesh, bones, and blood, but he was completely unknown about the mysterious paths. As it became clear from the explanation of the mentor, the ways really existed exactly 7. The path of the horse, the path of the wolf, the path of a fierce tiger, the path of the destructive exterior, the path of the divine dragon, the path of the crucible, and the transcendental path of the rainbow. Having reached the top of the horse's path, a person will be able to stop without much effort to stop a dozen horses rushing at him. The cultivation of the wolf path at the peak of his capabilities allows a person to become stronger and more deadly than a flock of frantic predators. On the path of the tiger, the power of a warrior increases even more. Ordinary inhabitants begin to tremble even from one of his aura. If it is possible to reach the path of the destructive elephant, then the earth itself shudders from each step of the master. He is able to crack mountain peaks and change the flow of rivers. Such power is worthy of the level of a great general. At the next step, the hero is likened to the heavenly dragon, freed from earthly shackles and became the true defender of the nation. And about the paths of the crucible and rainbows, even the older brother knew very little. Only the fact that the masters who have reached this divine level are offered into heaven as living saints. The young man was sincerely struck by such a revelation. He became curious. Would he be able to return to his world if he reaches true immortality? He was also interested in what kind of path their wise mentor is now. However, before answering this question, he decided to find out from his younger brother how many clans are located in their area. He was able to recall only 3. As it turned out, the other 2 were here only because they could not afford a better place. Their master chose this edge solely because he considered him his homeland. But in fact, he was the only person in the district who had reached the path of a ferocious tiger. And the hero understood that thanks to his unique system, he has every chance to achieve even such a dizzying level of skill. On this, Huchi decided to complete the instructive lesson and asked his younger brother to remember the main rule. Cultivation does not tolerate fuss and rush. You need to develop sequentially, paying attention to the slightest details and preserving the internal balance. The hero only bowed gratefully, understanding the value of the knowledge gained. Now that the Zhao family no longer posed a direct threat to him, it was time to catch a few more mystical fish to finally break through the skin barrier and take the next step on the path of improvement. Over the old habit, he went fishing to his beloved lake. Thanks to the accumulated dexterity, his boat soon began to roll up under the weight of a rich catch. The young man even began to think about the acquisition of a more spacious vessel. However, the mystical fish, unfortunately, was not among the production. He even began to doubt whether he would be able to catch at least one such rare. At this point, its percentage of synchronization with the system increased to almost 31.7. At this pace, he will really soon reach the peak of the skin stage. However, suddenly, while the hero studied the testimony of the system, some strange pen flew past him. In the next instant, the water began to violently boil, unwound the boat like a toy in a whirlpool. Then, from nowhere, powerful spray appeared and some kind of terrible, inhuman sound. Turning around, the young man with horror noticed that a titanic battle was unfolding on his peaceful lake. A huge toad grabbed a gigantic size of a bird with her powerful jaws. When the feathered monster was desperately trying to break out, the toad with a loud warlike scream collapsed to the ground. Her massive body gave rise to a tsunami that covered the hero with his head. As a result of this chaos, his entire boat scattered into small chips, and the fish sailed back into the depths. The bird, barely breaking out of the deadly embrace, published such a piercing cry. These sound waves inflicted serious mental damage to the hero. Losing consciousness, he helplessly sank to the bottom of the lake. When the young man came to his senses, the first that he saw was his little friend, Crab, nicknamed the Claw. The hero's heart was filled with gratitude to these devoted babies, who once again saved him from trouble. Remembering the latest events, he realized that he had lost consciousness from the monstrous scream of that bird. It really was a terrifying creature. However, the creature that managed to seize such a monster was even more terrible. Lying on the wet land, the young man bitterly understood that he wasted precious time in vain. He had neither fish nor a boat, which means that the breakdown of the skin barrier will have to be postponed indefinitely. However, at that moment, a small crocodile came closer to the owner and, opening his mouth, demonstrated his find a red-black perch. So everything was not lost, and hope was still warming in his heart. As the hero already knew from the theory, the energy of blood reflects the physical power of the warrior. However, a person cannot become powerful only thanks to strong energy. Rather, on the contrary, the developed body cultivates internal energy, so it is not a source of power, but only its result. But this result can significantly strengthen the source, forming a favorable endless cycle of improvement. Soon the hero sat down in a convenient pose for concentration and meditation. He also lit special incense. Not so long ago, the elder brother of Huchi provided him with these precious sticks that help significantly in training. As Lion Shi understood, the key to overcoming the skin barrier lies in the correct concentration of blood energy in the chest area. The meat of mystical fish was supposed to accelerate this complex process. Now he has already made his 38th attempt to surpass this stubborn barrier. The older brother reminded that to overcome the skin barrier, it is necessary to concentrate all the energy to stimulate the bodily cover and muscle fascia. It was about the power that is seething in the body during intense physical training. It is she who is the true source of life energy. When he feels a burning sensation in his chest, this energy must be directed along the bones to the lungs until it reaches the outer shell and breaks into the skin. In this way, the peak of the skin stage is achieved. However, his 40th attempt ended with the fact that he felt an unbearable burning sensation in the heart. As a result, it all ended with another failure. His percentage of synchronization due to stubborn training increased to 49, but he could not even break through this first barrier. However, the hero had a persistent foreboding that when he reaches the treasured 50%, something radically important would happen. At this moment, the meat reserves came to an end, and there were too few spiritual plants for them to bring tangible benefits, so you will have to go fishing again. Just at this moment, looking out the window, he realized that he was already engaged in dawn, staining the sky in delicate pink tones. Suddenly, 2 middle-aged men were knocked on his door. Li or Father Chen Jin Chen noticed that Lian Shu had returned quite late and decided to visit him. The hero became curious why the venerable uncles visited him with such an early visit. As it turned out, the fact is that they have not seen their sons for a long time, and therefore went to ask how they were doing the academy. The young man calmly apologized that he returned so late that he completely forgot to tell everything. In general terms, all three things went well. They attracted the attention of mentors exclusively in a positive sense. They were even allocated a separate room for living. Therefore, friends decided to stay at the academy for more intense training. In fact, the hero could not admit to the fathers that their sons were simply afraid to return home. Their wounds after recent events had not yet been completely healed, both physical and sincere. The hero managed to reassure the alarmed fathers, assuring them that they can be proud of their sons. The future of these youths was definitely bright and complete prospects. In addition, venerable men came not only to visit, but also to inform Lian Shi the important news. In the village, they were going to organize the next sacrificial ceremony in honor of the river deity. The young man vaguely remembered this ancient tradition, but it seemed to him that a similar ritual was carried out about 3 months ago. However, it turned out that after yesterday's heavenly sign, the inhabitants simply could not do otherwise. The heavenly river god suddenly jumped out of the water surface, grabbed a giant fiery bird, and they say that even the heavens split at that mystical moment. At that moment, Lian Shi with an inner grin realized that these two took the very gigantic toad for the deity. He kindly promised his uncles to sacrifice money for the ceremony and also take part in it. After their departure, the hero returned to his secluded lotus cave. He began to work out combat receptions in every possible way, training with his faithful pets. Now he could skillfully control 1,500 liters of water, squeezing them to a compact 10-liter volume. This meant that each liter of its water flow had a 15 kilogram with a crushing power. In addition, being underwater, his physical strength significantly exceeded the skin barrier. He would easily deal with 4 opponents of the level of his pets. The only drawback that the young man noticed was the complete absence of a suitable weapon for his unique battle style. The third older brother mentioned that in this world there is a legendary spiritual weapon capable of independent regeneration and even pumping their characteristics. However, its production required rare materials and invaluable treasures. Therefore, Liang Shi feverishly reflected on how to get something similar. Suddenly, a little claw began to call the owner invitingly, sensing something unusual under the water column. The hero also approached the indicated place and saw a bright golden glow. It was a pen that fell from that giant bird. It looked quite unusual and clearly radiated mystical energy. Since the young man was just about to look into the forge to choose a worthy weapon, he decided to grab the find in order to find out more about her from knowledgeable people. Soon he reached the Pinya County. Slowly walking along the paved streets, the hero was looking for where the older brother's store should be located. Soon he noticed a black column of smoke rising completely nearby. However, not wanting to be distracted from the initial mission, the young man still went straight to the forge. The blacksmith warmly greeted his younger brother in his institution. And then Lian Shi openly admitted that he found something interesting on morning fishing, and decided to ask the master's opinion. However, as soon as he showed the pen, the artisan's eyes lit up with recognition. It was a feather of crimson phoenix, the real mystical treasure, the value of which the hero did not even suspect. Of course, the young man was interested in the desire to learn more about this amazing find, and the elder brother willingly shared his knowledge. The phoenix feather was considered the rare mystical artifact. When a majestic bird is in mortal danger, it absorbs its entire life energy into plumage, and then it dumps it, and the feathers fly around the world like the seeds of hope. One of the feathers, which has the greatest concentration of vital energy, is called a golden crimson pen. It is it that gives the legendary creature complete rebirth, restoring his body to the pristine state. Lian Shi at first thought that he had found exactly the very golden feather, but unfortunately, he was mistaken. It was a regular pen of phoenix. Nevertheless, even such a find was still of great value for any cultivator. In the place of the hero, the older brother would not simply thoughtlessly absorb the energy in him, but would prefer to create spiritual weapons from him. And that was exactly what the young man dreamed about. Judging by his last battle with a crab, the spear would fit perfectly for battles using its unique underwater techniques. Therefore, the hero chose this particular type of weapon, which seemed a very unusual choice for their clan. Of course, the longer the weapon, the greater its radius of the defeat, but it also became much more difficult to control it. However, Lian Shi has already carefully considered everything and asked the master to use the found pen for making a spear. The blacksmith only smiled knowingly and promised to fulfill the request of the younger brother with particular care. Just at that moment, the hero decided to ask what the ominous pillar of the smoke that he noticed in the distance was. But as soon as he mentioned this, the elder brother's face darkened with anger. It was a temple where a terrible fire happened in the morning, but among the raging flames, something that no one expected to see. From there, mountain demons crawled out, spreading in all directions as a product of hell. Shortly before collapse, the exhausted and wounded woman desperately ran through the dark forest. Finally, she saw the lights of civilization and immediately headed for the saving light. Noticing a native boy sweeping the monastery floors, she immediately prayed for help. The last thing she managed to pronounce was the words of salvation before the forces finally left her, and the woman lost consciousness. Soon alarmed monks gathered around a stranger, trying to bring her to her senses. They prayed to the mercy of the Buddha when the woman finally opened her eyes. Everyone with sincere curiosity wanted to know what happened to the unfortunate. Having come to his senses and realizing that he was in the safety of the temple, the girl told her terrifying story. She was from Haju County, but 3 months ago she decided to move to Pinyan to visit distant relatives. However, on the way, some ruthless bandits attacked her. They blindfolded her and took her to some kind of nightmare. It was a real earthly hell, where people were tormented until only a weak ghost of the former person remained from them. The monks suggested that perhaps these people demanded a ransom for the captive, but the reality was much more terrifying. The kidnappers called it only a material for the manufacture of some kind of pearls. The woman with a shudder recalled how the bones of the people in which these damned pearls were grown swelled to incredible sizes, and the unfortunate sacrifices shouted from unbearable pain. All this time, people in dark hoodies constantly prayed, reading some sinister spells over the sufferers. And when it was time to extract the pearl, they took out their ritual knives wrapped in human flesh. In such a barbaric way, they mined bloody red pearls, from which truly demonic energy emanated. Some reapers did not even understand that it was from their swollen abdomen that these monsters in human form. The eldest of the brothers, with a gloomy look, explained to the youngest that these were the pearls of immortality, the forbidden artifact of dark magic. At first, these unfortunate people were forcibly fed a poisoned decoction of the flesh of mountain monsters. Regardless of the sex of the victim, their stomachs began to swell ominously, bearing lumps from distorted flesh. After another 3 painful months, these lumps turned into disgusting pearls, from which real pearls of immortality could already be obtained. If, God forbid, these pearls cannot be extracted in time, then they can hatch on their own. The younger brother became curious who could appear from these damned pearls. However, the elder made it clear that this is clearly not the information that the young man would like to know. Just last morning, the younger novice was instructed to bring food to the guest to come to her senses a little after the horror experienced. The boy carefully brought her still smoking food. However, having crossed the threshold of the room, he felt some disgusting stench smell. Looking at the floor, he saw that everything was flooded with fresh blood, and then his eyes appeared some kind of humanoid creature standing in the center of the room. At first, he thought that this was the same lady, but on the bed he also distinguished someone's motionless silhouette. The body of the murdered woman rested on the bed, but her empty eyes literally drilled the young man with his dead look, which is why he was frightenedly recoiled. However, unexpectedly something drove him on his head, and when the guy, barely daring, looked up, he saw a terrifying look of a baby, still wrapped in the umbilical cord hanging under the ceiling. Soon, one of the frightened novices rushed over to the help of the Yang clan. The arrived warriors were sincerely grateful to Mr. Lee for agreeing to go with them for an investigation. Otherwise, they would have to disturb the greatest master. However, Lee did not see much sense in gratitude. Such was the sacred duty of any cultivator. In fact, recently he received a secret order to deal with the incident in the temple, cover the mark leading to the Lord Zhao, and return the thing they need. The subordinate did not understand anything in these political games, but the mentor knew that he himself would understand everything when he sees the scene with his own eyes. Soon they reached the massive walls of that very temple. However, when the scouts opened the gate, what they saw shocked them. There were many bodies, moreover, divided into separate parts with surgical accuracy. The picture was struck even by seeing the views of the monk. He immediately ran to his mentor, trying to save him. The people from the Yang clan preferred to start trying to look around and figure out what happened here. What they watched was like these people were bitten by a kind of giant predatory insect. There was not a single corpse, only torn remains. And then the mentor Li understood. It seems that this is exactly what Zhongxiang wanted him to hide from prying eyes. But suddenly they noticed bloody traces indicating that they were methodically dragging the bodies somewhere. These ominous traces ended just where the monk was now on his knees. At that moment, he opened at the entrance to the main hall of the temple. And when people from the Yang clan arrived there, the young man was already praying intensely. What he saw was not succumbing to a rational explanation. This was more like a manifestation of pure madness. In the center of the hall, a lot of human corpses were poured, twisted into one disgusting cocoon. Apparently, it was this vile cocoon that the mentor was supposed to be returned according to the order received. However, at this critical moment, someone suddenly locked them all inside the temple. The frightened warriors immediately began to desperately knock on massive doors, trying to understand who could arrange a similar trap for them. However, the mentor Lee perfectly understood that the door was locked to the smallest of all their problems. The creature that has now matured in a disgusting cocoon was about to be born. It was an egg of the mountain monster, and everything indicated the characteristic handwriting of the sinister cult of the Mother of Spirits. Hearing this damned name, an experienced warrior instantly understood the essence of what was happening. They belonged to the remnants of the fallen dynasty, whose dark rituals were considered forbidden for many centuries. As it was known from ancient chronicles, when the mountain monster hatches, it immediately absorbs the blood and flesh of others in order to enter the second stage of development. By this moment, the ripening has almost ended. The creature will be reborn from minute to minute. This monster will be comparable with the warrior of the level of the horseman path, which made him an extremely dangerous opponent. As soon as the mentor uttered these words, the demonic hand with sharp claws escaped from the cocoon, and then the rest of the body appeared, demonstrating the second stage of the mountain monster in all its terrifying beauty. The monk was still scared, without daring to raise his eyes to the product of darkness. The monster immediately jumped to the holy man and gnawed at his neck, instantly gnawing the artery. He eagerly drank blood, smacking with pleasure. Then he quickly dealt with those who tried to stop him. Lee did not know what to do in such a hopeless situation. This monster was equal to the warrior of the horse's path, and he did not even reach the fourth barrier. He needed to run. His strength was clearly not enough to defeat such a monster. But at the same time, if he knocked out the door, then this nightmare would burst out and began to terrorize innocent people. Nevertheless, the mentor understood that his own survival was much more important. He always lived on the principle that his life is in the first place. If he closes his eyes and stops looking at what is happening, then he will be able to maintain the illusion of security, all in order to ensure that his elderly father is happy. Of course, the man understood that he was a disgusting person, because he literally allowed this monster to devour his comrades before his eyes. However, when the creature ran directly to him, he still exposed his blade in a protective gesture. At heart, he decided to fight back to at least find out how strong the monster of the level of the horseman is. At this critical moment, the warrior remembered his distant childhood. He dreamed of becoming a great swordsman like the master of the Yang clan. The younger sister has always admired the decisiveness of the older brother, especially when the boy said that he would go to the city with his father today. There they will begin to work for the Zhao family. This was their last chance for a happy life, and the sister sincerely believed that her older brother would definitely succeed. However, as soon as they arrived at the estate, a young gentleman with his arrogant servants immediately began to mock these simpletons. They called him a geek, who did not even have a mother, and all that he had left was to hide in a corner and shake with his miserable father. So every evening the boy returned home, beaten and humiliated by the young master. Of course, he tried to explain to his father that the master was the first to attack him. However, the parent only wiped his blood and asked his son to be smarter, to behave with dignity, respect the elders, to be modest and diligent in his studies. But the most important thing is that he had to become the one whom he himself could respect. And then the boy began to reflect on how the master Yang would act. He was in his place. Soon he accumulated money and met with the great master, who allowed him to join the clan, but on condition that he will remain discipline and humility. He should not have been harmful to those who are weaker, or abuse the position in order to achieve mercenary interests. He was also obliged to respect mentors and senior students, because the follower of the Yang clan must stand guard and fight for good. And of course, he cannot be seduced by any dark forces. The boy always knew that the great master Yang was an unshakable warrior, with a furious look and a sharp sword that he brings death to his enemies. His blade was always ready to cut, pierce, chop and chop opponents. The blade shone brighter than gold and sapphire, and its rapid movements were like sunlight, piercing the darkness and fear of enemies. That is how this legendary man fought against the hordes of monsters in the middle of barren sands and ferocious winds. It was this unsurpassed warrior that the mentor Lee always admired in heart. So having lost his hand in an unequal battle, he realized that he could not defeat this monster. He also could not save his comrades in arms. At that moment, a fire began in the temple, but they could not escape, because the mentor only wounded the monster, and then he was lucky that he was weaker than the typical level of the horseman path. Of course, his student understood that Mr. Lee acted correctly, as a true hero should act. However, the warrior almost laughed at this bitter irony, recalling Liang Shu, and how he selflessly defended his friends. He knew very well that in this world full of people are much bolder and worthy of himself. The mentor remembered how, as a child, Zhao Heyuan gave him a cruel order, to knock out all his teeth to orphan. The young gentleman threatened that if he did not obey, then his teeth will be knocked out by himself. As a result, the guy had no choice. He came closer. He had to do this to climb to the top and become a powerful person. Somewhere at the same time, reinforcements arrived at the burned temple. When the soldiers went inside, they saw a terrifying picture: brown human bodies and burned silhouette of a monster. On the ground lay a sign identifying the personality of the deceased. At the last gasp, Lee remembered how he did then with the children. He brought them a small bun as a treat. Still, he could not harm them. And although he himself turned out to be beaten and without teeth, he was a hero in his soul. And the heroes do not offend the weak and defenseless. Events are transferred to the gloomy estate of Zhao. The head of the family in every possible way beat his subordinate for the shown self-will. He screamed violently about how the Lord was angry if the case with the temple opened and goes outside. However, the frightened Jun Xiang only made excuses, explaining that they simply could not hesitate. On that fatal day they found out that the woman escaped from imprisonment. They immediately rushed in pursuit. But who could know that she would run to the temple? When they found that place, everything was already flooded with blood, and they simply had no other choice except to send a mentor there. As soon as the scouts went into the suitor reading room, they slammed the door behind them. They also staged a fire to destroy any existing evidence. The head of the family understood that there was no sense from this fire. To burn everything to the ground, it would take for 3 days, and they literally did not have so much time. However, suddenly an unknown voice ordered this booth to stop. The mysterious figure stated that these two in equal shares were guilty of what happened. They did not follow the girl, and this is what came of it. They also turned out to be insufficiently devoted to the Great Mother, and everyone knew very well how insincerity should be punished. As a result, he instantly killed one of the failed servants. That was the will of the Great Mother, who does not forgive betrayal. The mysterious person also warned the Lord that he had made a great contribution to the development of the cult, so he is sure that the Great Mother would forgive him. However, he asked not to forget that they are all in the same boat and should hold together. The frightened head of the family immediately began to apologize to the Lord, promising to correct everything that he had done. After Vladika, he also recalled that they cannot abandon their plans for their son. Immediately after these words, the man fell to his knees and swore to the Lord that he would not allow this anymore. Leaving, the mysterious figure explained that she was relied on for them for the last time. As soon as he left, the lord of the family was able to calmly exhale with relief. The servant did not know what to do now, given that the Lord openly threatened them. However, they could not do anything. If we were not talking about the wealth and power of their kind, he would not even listen to this old man. The patriarch was at least glad that that assistant allowed the woman to be born a monster who got rid of all unnecessary witnesses. They would no longer have any other such a successful chance. In the end, everything went almost according to the plan, while they had to hide, because the authorities have already begun an official investigation. As soon as everything is settled and forgotten, they will go to the distant Hangzhou. There, the master had vast lands, where the family could continue their usual life. His son will continue to study there, and that upstart will no longer climb into their affairs. Unless, of course, they did not want them to finally get rid of them. They should have minimized the consequences of what happened as much as possible. Somewhere at this time, the hero slowly wandered around the noisy market. After the sad news heard, Liangshu was sad that the mentor was so tragically passed away. He also recalled the day when he was the only one who tried to intercede for his friends. Apparently, deep down, he was still a noble and worthy person. But Liangshu was curious what exactly happened in the temple. The elder brother said that on that fateful day there was no official request from the authorities in the Yang clan. The hero also intrigued this mountain demon. Fortunately, the monster was already dead and no longer posed a threat. At that moment, while he thought thoughtfully, one of the local fishermen called him. He suggested Liang Len to see what was happening. A whole curious crowd gathered there. As a result, the hero, led by interest, followed the uncles. He did not suspect that at this very moment a monster carefully watched him. He endlessly repeated the name Lian Shi and muttered something about death and revenge. At this time, looking at the hero's dilapidated house, the gathered people understood that the more a person suffers in his life, the more he becomes a magnificent person. According to only the appearance of this dwelling, it was clear. Lian Shi really suffered greatly in childhood and youth. The son of a noble man did not understand why they came here at all. In addition, the father held the attached and did not let go for half an hour. It seemed to the boy that that small fisherman did not stand such humiliation and time spent. However, for such impudent conversations, the father only awarded his son with a painful blow by a branch. He did not understand at all how a person like him could be born as stupid and ungrateful offspring. The man decided to teach this insolent to death for what he did. All this from afar was watched by local residents. From the very beginning, they knew that this boy was sent to the Academy of Martial Arts, hoping that they would make a worthy person out of him. But in the end, he did things he was very complained of and even expelled with shame. Among the observers was Aunt Lian Shi. She bitterly recalled that when she herself was quite wealthy, she did not even share a rice grain with his nephew. However, her husband only shouted loudly that if the boy is grateful, he had to repay them for the good that they once showed his worthless father. after which the whole crowd fell silent, seeing how the hero himself approaches his house. He only stopped in bewilderment, not realizing what a performance unfolds right on his threshold. The man immediately flew to greet his dear nephew. Looking around his rich clothes, he delightedly noticed that the hero had become like a young, proud pine, an unbending, steadily converting fierce gusts of wind. It was not surprising that the Master Yang himself made him his personal student. All the audience whispered, not believing that Liang Shi really became a student of that very legendary hero. The status of a personal student is almost the same as becoming the adoptive son of the master. Now, even the authorities of the prefecture will have to seriously reckon with the opinion of Liang Shi. Everyone immediately crowded near the hero, asking what great future he reached. They also significantly hinted that the guy should seriously think about marriage. At that moment, the uncle humiliatedly apologized for his dishonest son, and admitted that he could not even think that he would fall to such low-powered acts. He was even ready to allow Liang Shi to score the impudent to his death, and would not prevent this. And the hero was clearly glad that he could now do everything he wants with this guy. In general, Liang Shi was not one of those who remember resentment for a long time, but you can't keep everything in himself. This can adversely affect spiritual well-being. As you know, for him it would be extremely important, given that now he was seriously engaged in martial arts. From the formidable expression of the hero's face, the guy immediately sobbed, sobbing. He recognized his wrong and was ready to even become his slave, only so that he had spared him. The hero satisfied such an apology, and he generously decided to forgive the impudent. In the end, he was already expelled from the academy, and besides, he was not the main instigator of all troubles. However, the boy's father clearly did not suit such generosity of the nephew. Once he was so generous, it means that he could not remain ungrateful in response. The man solemnly decided to reward the hero of 100 silver linen for his kindness. Simple villagers for the first time in their lives saw such a huge bunch of money sparkling in the sun. At that moment, an uncle with aunt of the hero appeared on the stage. The man also appeared before the young master, explaining that he was the real Uncle Liang Shi, and suggested discussing compensation with him. The inhabitants of the village immediately began to indignantly drive this insolent man away. After all, when little Liang Shi was dying of hunger, he did not even open his door to him. And now, when it came to silver, he suddenly became his loving relative. However, his uncle was still sure that this should not bother anyone. If he had once helped his nephew, he would have died on the street long ago. But Liang Shi calmly explained that he did not know this person. According to the memoirs of the true owner of the body, this so-called uncle was never kind to him. He was a real parasite living at the expense of others. Even when Liang Shi was dying of hunger, he did not even give him a bowl of rice. The young man calmly explained that if a man wants to help him so much, then soon a grandiose festival in honor of the river god will be held in the village. Each resident must sacrifice at least 100 coins. Since the gentleman was so kind, he could help the fellow villagers cover these expenses so that they could save money for the coming winter. In addition, they could arrange field kitchen for several days. Recently in the vicinity, there were many starving tramps in need of help. The inhabitants of the village were delighted and sincerely thanked the young hero for being so generous and wise. Liang Shi was glad that he finally elegantly figured out this annoying problem. Then he calmly retired to his home. Last time, when he coached overcoming the skin barrier, he was not as dense as before, but somehow inflamed and supple. Now that his internal energy became much stronger, the young man was sure that he would be able to break through the first barrier to improvement. To do this, he scored a full bath of cool water. As it was known from the instructions of the older brothers, the breakthrough causes the strongest internal overheating. One error, and the brain can simply burn from an excess of energy. To avoid such a disaster, you will have to physically cool the body during the process. So, plunging into the water, he began to overcome the first barrier. Soon, water literally boiled around the place where Liang Len was sitting. The energy began to dance in waves, absorbed into the tissues of his body and strengthening each cell. He still managed to overcome the stubborn barrier by 41st attempts. Having experienced his renewed force, the hero realized that he could now control about 250 liters of water. His abilities have almost doubled. However, even despite this impressive progress, the system percentage did not increase. It was still equal to 49. Of course, the young man did not expect such a powerful effect from breaking through the skin barrier. If he copes with the rest of the barriers, he will be able to control entire tons of water. In addition, his abilities perfectly complemented each other. He had nothing more to wish. At that moment, the hero opened the door and suddenly collided with his annoying uncle, who accidentally touched a sash. The man with a loud cry fell to the ground, but he immediately got up and looked at his beloved nephew with feigned care. The dissatisfied Liang Shi coldly asked what this man wanted from him. Uncle explained that he was very worried, as if his dear nephew did not starve and did not sleep badly. Therefore, he brought a little rice and a jug of fresh water. The young man politely asked his uncle to leave the provisions to himself, because from now on he would no longer suffer from a lack of food. In fact, he refused because in this world the food was indeed an incredibly valuable resource, and taking handouts below its dignity. At that moment, Uncle tried to squeeze out the door, and the hero in the end once again inadvertently touched him, throwing him to the ground. The man began to scream indignantly, not understanding what the nephew was doing. He recalled that he was his native uncle, the only close relative, and even the house in which Lianshi lived rightfully belonged to him. He considered the hero a real idiot, because when a good gentleman offered him such a fabulous amount, he did not even take half. He could spend this money to help his cousin, but did not. Obviously, because he completely did not respect him. The hero got angry. It seemed to him that his uncle takes too much he takes and literally begs for trouble. Even this impudent man was amazed at how Liangshi changed literally in a second. He seemed even much higher and more impressive than ever before. Therefore, a frightened relative immediately began to ride the ground, pointing to the kind people at this cruel boy who entered a noble clan and now does not even recognize his blood family. He plaintively reminded that he was the only uncle, and his son was a cousin of an unfortunate orphan. However, at that moment, one of the inhabitants with disgust spat this man directly in the face. An elderly woman viciously reminded this so-called uncle that he did not even help to pay a simple coffin for the boy's father. He did not share with the starving child food, even when he was dying of exhaustion. Due to his greed and impudence, Father Lianshi inherited only one old boat. He had to work day and night to feed his own son. However, his uncle only screamed angrily, not understanding where these sluts came from, which no one gave a word. But at that moment, the venerable elder intervened. He painfully hit the impudent with his cane directly into his stomach. The old man was clearly angry that when the guy had something to work out, this parasite hastened to use the fruits of someone else's success, although before his trace caught a cold. Then he began to drive him away so that he did not stink around the hut of Liangshi. Looking at the elder, the hero understood that this old man was far from the only village headman. However, he was a special person, the head of the influential family of Chen. Even the Lord Zhao himself was obliged to reckon with him and show proper respect. Therefore, Lianshi gratefully bowed to the venerable old man, wanting to find out why he came here. As it turned out, the elder decided to turn to Lianshi with an important request, so that he became a priest at their upcoming river festival. The hero understood that this was a great opportunity. He could carefully observe everything that was happening at the sacred ceremony. In addition, it seemed to him that it was there that he could figure out what kind of mysterious function he appeared in a system called favor. He gladly pleased the older, agreeing to his request. The man only asked the young priest to carefully learn ritual texts. The day of the festival was already nearing. The hero woke up the next morning in beautiful weather. The sun was shining brightly, birds sang cheerfully, and he was going to go to school to study a letter. Liangshi did not know so many local hieroglyphs, which in itself was a problem. In addition, he needed to learn a complex ritual text, and he simply had no choice. Therefore, the young man decided to go to the educational institution and become a diligent student, as was carried out in the ancient world. Soon the hero got to a modest school. There, an elderly monk told children about the importance of zeal, as well as that they should not be contacted with criminals, because they were unworthy people in their very nature. The young man was amazed at what place he got to. He did not suspect that when it came to school, it was the initial one. At this moment, one little schoolgirl complained to the teacher that Liangshi did not repeat his words. The mentor clearly became furious, believing that their senior student began to be conceived. He recalled that he should be grateful to his master for the fact that such an ignoramus was generally allowed to school. He should also be grateful that someone like him agreed to become his teacher. However, the hero accurately repeated the words previously spoken. Follow the laws, respect power, act wisely. Zeal will bring you comfort, honor, and wealth. Also, do not contact criminals, for they are not worthy by their nature. Study and labor. You must be diligent in order to know the world. As a result, he said word for word exactly that the teacher had just read. Having bowed, the young man explained that he did not repeat only because he had already remembered everything the first time. However, the hero became clear that a similar way to study hieroglyphs is not too effective. After that, the angry teacher called the guy an impudent and recalled that this sacred method was transmitted by many generations, and Lianshi did not understand anything at all. Of course, the mentor did not want the student to believe that he was looking down on him. But what could such an ignoramus at all? The hero courteously explained that there is definitely a sense from their semantic methodology, but it is very complicated and still requires the voicing and writing of each individual hieroglyph. However, he proposed an alternative way, where the hieroglyph is divided into symbols indicating specific sounds. He called this pinyin system. Suddenly, one of the interested teachers realized that this method sounds much simpler and more logical than the traditional semantic. Therefore, with a friendly smile, he asked the boy to tell about his vision in more detail. All those present, even children, were amazed to see Mr. Sai, who arrived from the capital. The respectful teacher approached, bowed and warmly greeted the tall guest. Soon, when a respected man listened to the hero's approach, he seemed to him quite interesting and promising. The teacher did not like such heresy at all, which poured into his ears and undermined the foundations. Mr. Sai himself explained that in the SUM it is customary to encourage talented scientists. If a person invents something useful for the state, he can receive a monetary reward, tax exemption, or even a noble title. It was just what the hero needs, because very soon people will begin to notice his unique abilities. To avoid suspicions, it was necessary to take control of control and create a plausible explanation for his talents. Mr. Sai understood that Lian Shi was definitely very gifted, so he even suggested that he continue his studies under his personal beginning. What the teacher clearly did not understand and did not approve. Therefore, Mr. Sai calmly explained to the conservative man that education should not know the estate differences. He learned from his wise mentor. The teacher considered it outrageous. Only people of the highest class could afford quality training. However, the master asked his colleague not to worry about anything, because he would fully be responsible for his student. What his ward will want will also become his desire, and what he himself cannot provide will find a worthy alternative. Of course, the hero with sincere gratitude accepted such a generosity of his new mentor. At this time, the water inhabitants of the lake played fun among themselves, throwing the ball. At some point, the playful crab accidentally threw the ball away to a small underwater cliff. From there came some bright bluish light attracting attention. When the little creatures sailed away and looked closely, they realized that something important was hidden under the dome of a large bell. Therefore, the kids began to patiently expect when the master would visit them on the next visit. The crocodile immediately began to vigorously lead Lan Shi behind him, smiling brightly. It was clearly seen that he begs for a well-deserved compliment. While the hero was not there, the pet significantly expanded this submarine, so that even a person would be able to go there without any difficulty. Therefore, the baby smiled smugly, while Lian Shi praised him in every possible way for the shower showing. To the surprise of the young man, this mysterious bell turned out to be much more than he initially expected. In addition, this bright bluish light emanated from algae, which, the higher it sailed, the brighter it glowed. As soon as the hero touched her, he realized that she had a rather soft and supple texture. No matter how much he tried to quit it or bite, unfortunately, nothing succeeded. Therefore, he called his loyal friends and invited everyone together to swim to the top of the mysterious structure. Fortunately, there was an air chamber where they could move and breathe calmly. Thus, travelers noticed the place where this whole mysterious vine stretched, pulsing with mystical energy. However, at that moment, a small creature crawled behind the hero. It was like an indigenous thing who, only seeing the young man, immediately tried to attack him. However, in the end, the creature only crashed into a solid stone, and the hero calmly made it clear that he had noticed her for a long time. She was too slow for a sudden attack. After which, Lian Shi carefully saw this emerald scolopendra. However, she did not give up, continuing to furiously attack the uninvited guest. And then his little devoted crab stood up to defend his master. Only then did Lian Shi notice that his faithful friend Clay had already grown significantly and became much stronger during their joint adventures. At that moment, the pet deftly grabbed the raging scolopendra into his powerful claws. The hero has always heard that the crabs have incredibly powerful stars, but this baby surpassed all expectations in size. But at that moment, the young man noticed that the predatory insect had a weapon worse, its oozing deadly poison. If he could tame her, he would have an excellent hidden weapon for future battles. Mental energy was just enough to subordinate. In addition, the guy's body became much stronger after the successful breakdown of the skin barrier. As a result, he deliberately scratched himself with a sharp stone and realized that he needed to order a special dagger. After the lacerate wounds, the body healed for too long. As a result, the hero touched a small aggressive insect, imposing a bloody sign of submission on him. However, the return from this miniature being turned out to be incredibly strong. The system literally screamed about the danger of overload. Soon, albeit with great difficulty, the baby still managed to tame. Lian Shi realized that Heavenly Scolopendra was indeed a serious opponent. He decided to affectionately call her Ane. This baby mutated, absorbing spiritual mushrooms and water, saturated with mystical energy. However, in order for it to evolve in the winged Heavenly Scolopendra, it was necessary as many as 10,000 units of the water entity, which shocked the young man with its astronomical sum. After which the hero decided to calmly find out from a fae where she managed to get so many spiritual mushrooms. Then she obediently crawled, showing Liangshu a secret passage into a deep cave. She was very dark and even slightly inspired the mystical fear of the soul. However, having gone closer, the hero unexpectedly noticed there a human decomposed corpse, holding a small box in bony hands. And from below there was an engraved inscription, where the former fleet general of the great dynasty Qian said that after a crushing defeat, being mortally wounded, he had no shame to appear before his majesty, and decided to meet his death in this secluded place. However, no matter how much the hero peers into this ancient text, much remained unclear. It did not seem that this noble man just drowned here. It seemed to the young man that perhaps somewhere nearby was a buried ancient warehouse or battlefield. There was still something valuable for modern adventurers. In addition, in the chest resting in the hands of the skeleton, apparently, those very precious spiritual mushrooms lay. So far, there was only one. The rest most likely ate just the same FI during her underground wanderings. Therefore, the hero carefully took the mushroom, and leaving, respectfully promised Mr. General to bury him in the sunny field so that the warrior's soul could finally find peace. The guy himself sincerely rejoiced. Now he could pump significantly. This rare trophy should have been enough to exceed 50% of the merger with the system. At first, the hero decided to give a faithful crocodile 1/6 of this priceless mushroom, Chunka and the claw, 1/12 part. Aft got nothing, because she herself had eaten a whole mushroom during her adventures. Finally, sharing all the necessary portions, the hero decided to eat the rest of the way. To his surprise, the mushroom was incredibly soft, tasty, and tender, like the best tofu. Having absorbed it, the young man immediately received 216 units of water in addition. It was even more than he received from that mighty crab. If you spend everything on pumping, then you can achieve unprecedented heights. And as expected, pumping, he reached a percentage of a merger of 70. And also, merging with the water element, I unlocked a new skill, Aquastrack. In this moment, the hero felt how the energy located inside his body began to slowly concentrate closer to his hands and legs. Therefore, Liangshi immediately went to the general's body, bowed, and thanked him for this invaluable gift. Then I decided to immediately go to check what he is now capable of. The young man immediately performed the first aqua fragment. However, in the next instant, he was already cut his face straight into a rock standing ahead. As a result, he realized that he had a powerful skill of fast movement, but he consumed too much energy, and the direction was extremely difficult to control without proper practice. However, the system proposed to improve the aqua fragment to the level of the aqua hork with the help of a mysterious river blessing, which the hero decided to engage in the future. He also tested his increased strength. Now he could control up to 400 liters of water. It was a cardinal improvement in all characteristics. Pets also pumped 200 and pissed of glasses each. Now his crocodile required 280 points of the water entity for the next level, and the young cannibal was only 240. The only problem was his baby crab, who needed as many as 7,600 units of the water entity for evolution. It seemed strange the hero that his friend Chonka managed to overtake everyone else in development, although he was tamed much later. However, he decided to write off this on the features of the digestive of the creature. And Som the cannibal was glad that the hero did not find out that he secretly lifted something during their absence. After that, the young man carefully studied the proposal to improve the new skill. Just a week later, the long-awaited river festival was planned. He could spend this time on reinforced training. It seemed that the favor of the river was closely connected with the upcoming ritual. This is how another week of intense training took place, and the early morning of the festival came. The hero came to wake his friend Lee, vigorously knocking on the door. The guy immediately lowered his hand, urging Aft to run closer. She immediately wrapped around his wrist, becoming like a kind of living bracelet. And the hero, as if nothing had happened, went out into the street, offering a comrade to go to the long-awaited festival. A huge number of people from all over the district gathered at the festival. However, suddenly a little girl who had completely behaved calmly burst into tears. Even her mother did not understand what happened to the baby. But suddenly the child indicated somewhere into the distance and roared loudly that there was a terrible monster. Mom understood that there could be no monster in their peaceful village, and she promised that if the baby stops crying, she would buy her delicious sweets. It seemed that only the children were the only ones who noticed the monster who followed them from afar with their predatory eyes. Soon the solemn festival began. The musicians immediately scored loudly into ritual drums, after which they began to solemnly bring the heads of sacrificial animals. The shaman was also already in its place with smoking incense. Finally, the time has come for the main priest to speak with his part of the ceremony. The hero climbed the steps where the cheekily equipped ritual tables stood, and at this solemn moment, the shaman announced the beginning of their sacred ritual. The hero immediately turned to the great river god. "By your mercy, The people took the lands Yansya that they lie near the holy river, and in return offers you gifts collected by people revereless in front of you. Everyone looked at the hero with genuine admiration when he so confidently and solemnly read out these ancient words. Lee was even sad. They grew up as comrades together, but he did not immediately notice the cardinal changes in his friend. Now it seemed that in front of him stood a completely different, more mature man. At this moment, gently climbing the tiles of the houses, the ominous monster began to creep onto them. And then the hero realized this was the very mountain monster that the older brother spoke of. He had cracked like a dried skin. The creature looked exactly like in a picture in the Almanac of Monsters. At this moment, the same baby noticed a monster sitting on the roof, and she screamed loudly, pointing her mother to this terrible beast. This time, the monster saw everyone present. Realizing that he was opened, he immediately jumped to the ground, starting to look for himself the nearest sacrifice. The girl stood motionless, while everyone else was scattering in a panic, because she desperately looked for her mother. Mother also ran in as scared among the crowd, unable to find a daughter among the chaos. At this critical moment, the monster directed its sharp fangs straight to a defenseless child. Everyone immediately rushed to protect the baby, although they were completely powerless in front of such a monster. As a result, Chen Jin-chan was very lucky. He managed to grab the girl in time and crawl to the side with a kubarmar. However, the monster was not going to give up so easily, and already flew into a wounded guy with double fury. At this moment, Lee either decided to use the equipment that Jan has mastered in the clan more recently. He aptly threw the blade into the monster, but he easily dodged. Looking at how close the monster was, it became obvious. He will not have time to quit another knife. All that the guy was able to do is to scream Lion Shi loudly, that he knows exactly about the tricks hidden by that tricks, and demand them to show them immediately. At this decisive moment, the hero stopped the monster through his power of water control, and then he rushed towards him, using the new skill of aqua eating. Thus, with one crushing blow, he drove the monster straight into the hard ground. Shortly before that, the young man understood that he would not have time to help friends with ordinary methods. Next to him was a vat with water, recruited specifically for the ritual. In order to make an aqua interpretation, he needed water in sufficient quantities. Therefore, he decided to independently create the conditions necessary for this in order to rush forward with a superhuman speed. And so, despite the fact that he had to reveal his unique abilities to his comrades, he managed to come to help in time. Chen Jin-chan first decided to find out in amazement from his older brother how he had just done it. However, without answering a curious question, Lian Shi ordered the comrade to immediately take the girl and run as far as possible from the battlefield. The rest he will do on his own. Chen Jin-chan agreed to act according to the hero's plan, but he promised that he would return soon to help in the battle. The hero at that time looked around the defeated monster under his feet, not understanding where such a creature came from here. However, literally in the moment, the monster disappeared from the place where he was lying. He already quickly headed for the guy to tear him to the bloody parts. The creature was incredibly strong. Even the hero barely managed to evade his ferocious attacks. At that moment, when they had a serious battle, his faithful brothers arrived. At this moment, the hero deftly grabbed the monster's powerful hand, realizing that he had to be immobilized. Then he ordered his friends not to wave knives to the right and left, but to aim precisely in the vulnerable joints of the monster. Immediately, both comrades pierced their blades right under the ribs of the beast. He screamed loudly, experiencing unbearable pain. However, this was clearly not enough to kill him. Therefore, the hero threw the enemy away by force. And then I decided to use my little aft in order to finally deal with the monster. Lion Shi knew a similar monster will definitely pass the poison of his faithful Scolopendra well. At this moment, frightened residents looked at the end of cramps, covering the massive body of the monster. He noticed attentive views and immediately rushed to people to be fed with their vital force. However, the hero could not allow him to cripple any of the unarmed villagers. Therefore, he grabbed a heavy column used for the ritual and then threw it into the monster. Then he piled on all weight from above, finally breaking through the body of the monster. It would seem that it's over, but the creature still continued to mumble something under her breath about immortality and all the time repeated the name Liang Shi with hatred. The locals decided that after the murder of this monster, the river god punished them for the shed blood. The guys saw that this village had a real panic. If this goes on, then it would be possible to forget about a calm life. However, the hero calmly explained that this monster was a blessing for the whole village. For this reason, he grabbed his blade and with one exact movement cut off the creature's head. This head was an ideal offering for the river god. With this sacrifice, he received the long-awaited bonus to the favor of the river. Soon the ritual was solemnly completed. Lian Shi, looking around his wounds, understood. If he had not struck the skin barrier, had not eaten that magic mushroom and had not increased the percentage of fusion, he could well die in this battle. He was still very lucky that there was an Ane nearby, because without her he certainly could not have overcome this mighty monster. However, in this battle, the young man realized that he really became much stronger. And besides, he finally received the favor of the river, with the help of which he could pump a new ability of aqua skating. However, even for such a feat, he earned quite a few points. But at that moment, a venerable elder of the village came, who brought an experienced doctor with him. When the hero was exposed for inspection, the doctor immediately noticed that Lian Shu was simply an amazing figure. Long muscular hands with a thin wasp waist. Of course, the young man was pleasant to such a praise, but he embarrassedly asked the man to process his wounds. By wrapping the hero with bandages, the doctor decided to ask what material his unusual things were made of. The patient calmly explained that the cape was donated to the second older brother. It was made of bear skin, strong like steel. He got robbed from the eighth older brother and was woven from heavenly silk. However, by the depths of the wounds received, the doctor realized that this young man had already struck the skin barrier. Immediately having heard about it, everyone in the village began to whisper delightedly. The hero decided not to hide anything from fellow countrymen. And then all the inhabitants of the village began to glorify the boy. Now the whole village was proud of them. Li also enthusiastically praised his older brother. He was a true warrior for whom to break through the first barrier cost only a couple of months of persistent training. Chen Jin-chan was sad. He was clearly not even to his talented comrade. And Uncle with bitterness understood that the boy became too strong. He could only hope that he would not take revenge on past grievances. The headman of the village decided to ask the hero what the monster was. People were scared and longed to get answers to their questions. Liang Shu calmly explained that this terrible creature was called a mountain demon. It was eaten by human blood, and he was attracted here by a massive accumulation of people. He could not say with confidence whether such relatives roam around their settlements, but this was definitely not the first monster of this kind. However, at that moment, the villagers suddenly realized that the head of the monster seemed to them amazingly familiar. Facial features were very reminiscent of Ban Xinjiang. If you look closely, there really were general characteristic features between them. Earlier, the hero really did not notice this similarity, but now it has become obvious. The young man recalled everything that he knew about the alchemical experiments of the Zhao estate, about the pearls of immortality and mountain demons in the temple. As a result, he realized the terrifying truth. These people purposefully grow demons, and he did not understand how he had not guessed about it before. Therefore, the hero immediately made it clear to the headman that something was extremely serious. He must immediately report the incident to his teacher. The boy understood. At all costs, he would make these monsters answer for his atrocities. Soon the hero arrived at the majestic estate of the master. His noble spouse immediately came out, wanting to find out what led the 9th student to them. The hero bowed respectfully, greeted the mistress, and explained that he had an important matter to the mentor. He also told a respected lady over a cup of fragrant tea that the incident with the temple was clearly somehow connected with the estate of Zhao. The mistress immediately realized how insightful this boy was. It is not surprising that her husband decided to choose him with his student. When Liang Shu realized that it seems that the lady also knew about these dark affairs, the girl only smiled mysteriously. She saw that the young man was all like needles from anxiety, but softly asked not to forget who was his wise teacher. Nevertheless, the Master Yang was the only warrior of the Tiger Path in the entire Pinyin district. Events moved to the ominous citadel of the sect of the Mother of Demons. Entire crowds of gloomy followers accumulated there. However, suddenly they heard some formidable hum in heaven and realized it was an attack. At that moment, the whole sky was lit up with a huge destructive attack. It was the Master Yang himself, who demanded from the demons to give up immediately, because he arrived to destroy them all. Somewhere at this time, the hero continued to train hard. 2 days have passed since his arrival, and the lady urged him to stay in the clan so as not to interfere with the plans of the teacher. She even gave him 2,000 coins for daily expenses. Of course, the hero was amazed at such generosity. She was ready to give him even more money and healing pills that restore the flesh. The wounds of the young man were almost completely dragged out. The mentor also believed that the cult of the Mother of Demons plans a large-scale attack on cultivators to gain vitality. Therefore, the lady held Liang Shi here for security reasons. However, at that moment, the hero was unexpectedly attacked. Having easily beat off the attack, the young man immediately began to look around in a wary in search of the attacker. It turned out to be the older brother of Hu Qi, who praised the youngest for such excellent vigilance. He was told that Liang Shu was in the clan, so he decided to visit to watch his training. He also handed the hero a battle spear in his hands, and offered to arrange a short sparring to check the skills. Liang Shu was amazed. Hu Qi really asked him about it. However, he warned that he would not restrain himself, and invited his elder brother to boldly attack. However, the first thing Hu Qi slyly threw forward an orange to distract the attention of the hero, and immediately attacked because of this curtain. Due to such insidious maneuver, the boy barely managed to defend himself. As a result, at that moment when the mentor noticed that the guy opened for a counterattack, he tried to attack him. But Liangshi managed to get out of this dangerous situation very elegantly and gracefully. As a result, after sparring, when Hu Qi realized that Liangshi really struck the skin barrier, besides looking at his rapid progress, his elder brother was sure that he certainly had a unique pattern of fate. However, the hero did not know what mysterious pattern we were talking about. But the elder brother intuitively understood that the day was not far off when the teacher would explain everything to him. The boy needed to wait a little more patiently. Then they decided to practice together for some time. Soon Liangshi finally drew out of intense exercises. The hero also told Hu Q about the dark affairs of the Zhao estates. His whole story was based on the fact that the guy carefully investigated in the last days. However, it seemed that everything was too simple and obvious. Everything looked like someone intentionally tried to leave obvious evidence. However, the elder brother understood that he might simply thought up his superfluous and overestimated the enemy's trick. He also brought a small, but valuable gift for Liangshi. It was a book perfect for a person who overcame the skin barrier. It was called The Flow of Flow and was very rare. As the mentor explained, technology was divided into two main classes: movements and strength. Power technology was necessary to deepen control over internal energy and blood. He asked the guy to carefully read this book and use the knowledge gained in their next sparring. Of course, the hero sincerely thanked his older brother for such a generous gift. However, he never called the true reason why he was looking for him. As it turned out, his brother sent for the hero to inform the joyful news. His spiritual weapon was already made. Somewhere at that moment in a gloomy dungeon, completely chained in a chain, there were captured monsters. People in black hoodies conducted ordinary prisoners past their cells. However, seeing one of the girls, the man realized that she was the same age as his own daughter. Because of this, he froze in confusion, which slightly surprised his partner. Soon they came to the master to report that all the ingredients were ready, and after 3 days they will be able to feed their monsters. They were obliged to take care of them well. It was especially important on the eve of decisive events. At this time, children, adults, and even the old people sat locked up in tight cells intended for food. The men desperately continued to call the young master, hoping that someone would come to save them. Returning to the hero and his spiritual weapons. As you know, it has its own soul. Where is the soul, there is its unique nature. Those who have an aggressive disposition have an explosive weapon, and those who are more flexible in flexible weapons have a more flexible weapon. Therefore, first of all, the older brother decided to soften tungsten steel, cleanse her essence, and enhance resistance. The second stage was the disclosure of the fiery energy of the crimson pen, and permission began to absorb its mystical power. The third stage was the treatment of a flying substance, balancing between illusion and reality. She ate blood. It was from her that the master decided to fashion the perfect shape of a spear for Liangshi. Then he asked his younger brother to help him in the final ritual. As you know, spiritual weapons should be saturated with the blood of its future owner. Therefore, the hero inflicted the wound in his palm and allowed the blood to drain onto the hot metal. However, to the great surprise of the older brother, the weapon began to actively reject this blood. He could not allow this to happen in his shift. Therefore, he immediately continued to work feverishly on weapons, and even broke the stove with zeal. But despite this, the master was not upset at all, because the perfect weapon for his younger brother was ready. Liangshi embarrassedly looked at his spiritual weapon. In addition, it was incredibly heavy, about 54 kilograms of weight. However, suddenly when he took him in his hands, the spear became surprisingly light for him. He also felt that it was as if connected with this blade by invisible threads, as if they had a common breathing and a single rhythm of the heart. Looking at the delighted gaze of Liangshi, the elder brother took him to the courtyard, where there were training stuffed animals so that the young man could try his new blade. The hero with amazing ease made many sharp and honed movements, cutting everything in his path. The elder brother looked at this sight with admiration and applauded. Then he suggested Liangshi give the blade his own name. The young man decided to name this magnificent weapon Phobo, the conqueror of the waves. Also, at this significant moment, the hero came to visit the fourth older brother. Of course, Liangshi was surprised to see at once both Hu Qi and the fourth older brother. He became very interested in what brought these two here at the same time. Hu Qi only sighed in displeasure, looking at the fourth brother. The mentor sent him to intelligence, but instead of fulfilling the mission, he had fun with women. But the fourth brother deftly explained that in this way, it was really possible to collect a lot of valuable information. And he managed to find out something extremely interesting. For example, he knew where one of the bases of the worship of the Mother of Demons could be. At that moment, he enjoyed pleasant alcohol along with the flowers of society and pretended not to notice suspicious personalities. But in fact, I perfectly saw people in black hoodies. It seemed to him stupidity that they really move among the white day in their characteristic clothes. Of course, The fourth brother continued to drink mockingly, but then carefully distracted the girls and slowly went after these suspicious types. As a result, I found them a secret refuge next to the temple. On this, his mission was successfully completed. The elder brother realized that in this case they could embody the plan of their teacher. Indeed, given the current situation, the direct attack looked quite appropriate. Therefore, the brothers agreed to do this for the next day. And the fourth brother, with a meaningful smile, recalled that this time their younger comrade would go with them. It was time for his hands to be stained with the blood of enemies. He could not avoid this forever, especially when there are so many dangerous opponents around. However, the elder brother Lu quite sharply besieged the fourth, calling his words stupidity. Then I decided to find out from the younger if he was ready for this important mission. And Lion Shi, of course, was only glad to help them in the fight against such evil. Events returned to the citadel of the Mother of Demons. At this time, a servant of the Zhao family arrived here. He was demonstrated by the demon and explained that he ate well and was stronger than ever before. Then they left the servant one-on-one with a monster. The old man looked sadly at his poor son. He tried very hard to become better, but turned into this terrible monster. However, if not for this victim, perhaps his father would never have managed to achieve immortality. So he was not particularly upset by such a fate. History continues at night on the hills near the temple. There, people in hoodies took away many women and men who only managed to catch. In addition, they cunningly talked that today's ingredients were real beauties. One of the guards even asked the head of permission to have a little fun with captives, and then put them into expense. And he, surprisingly, agreed, but warned. It was necessary to cope quickly. Otherwise, they will simply kill him for such disobedience. The brothers carefully watched all this from afar. They immediately realized that this was the place that the fourth brother spoke of. They were very lucky that the teacher gave them a black dog prick name. Without him, they would not have found a den of enemies. However, at that moment, the frightened dog growled loudly on something in the dark. The elder brother immediately leaned toward the dog, stroked and tried to calm the alarmed animal. Lion Shi, looking around, realized that for some reason, there was no fourth brother next to them. It turned out that the whole thing was that he was a skilled archer, so now he took the most convenient position for a sudden attack. Suddenly, he attacked the first. His goal was the man who decided to use the defenseless captive. However, in the end, the villain was instantly killed right in front of his comrades. Realizing the attack, people in the hoodies immediately began to panic and rush about. And the elder brother calmly explained to the bewildered Lian Shu that there was a conditional signal from the fourth brother. Therefore, the three of them immediately rushed into an open and decisive battle. First of all, the fourth older brother quickly flew into the enemies, who, with his powerful body, broke through heavy wooden gates like chips. The hero was sincerely struck by what he saw. After all, this guy was at the level of the glass's power. Now it was the turn of the attack of Hu Qi along with his younger brother. At this moment, the fourth brother took a showdown with numerous mercenaries, and the archer helped him, maintaining the air with air, settled on a high fence nearby. Soon, Lian Shi, along with the older brother of Hu Qi, intervened in a fierce battle. At this moment, people in the hoodies realized that the young man could not effectively use a long spear in close combat, and decided to crush him with a massive attack. However, they were very mistaken. The hero was no longer a newcomer in the elements of a spear. When everything subsided, the older brother asked Liang Shi to take a black ranger with him, find the hostages, and take them as far from the battlefield as possible. Events moved to a gloomy dungeon located under the complex. Upon learning of the violators, people in the hoodies immediately hastened to meet them on the outskirts of their den. At this intense moment, one of the men doubted the correctness of what was happening. He secretly rejoiced that they would be killed soon, and on this all the torment would finally end. They were ordered to cut out all the witnesses to the single one. He considered it a fair punishment for his sins, because it was he who missed that girl from the temple. But among the victims in the temple were children of the same age as his own daughter. He could no longer endure this and considered himself a sinner who would not escape God's punishment, like all his accomplices. However, at that moment, a friend did not have time to help the suffering comrade, as he was coldly killed right before his eyes. The last thing the unfortunate whispered was that Zhongxiang and his master are to blame for everything that is happening. The killed this panicar was Zhongxian himself, who was clearly indignant that his subordinates were frightened by some 4 puppies from the Yang clan. He immediately ordered to release all the mountain demons, who were only kept in imprisonment. In fact, the man inwardly panicked, everything fell on his poor head, and he had to urgently do something to save the situation. However, at the same time, it represented the perfect opportunity to use your secret trump card. If he manages to get through a secret passage to his main weapon, he will be able to radically change the course of this game in his favor. Somewhere with the onset of Bloody Dawn, the brothers already killed many enemies, but the younger comrade was still not visible. Most likely, he carefully descended from the mountains along with the liberated hostages, leading them to a safe place. Therefore, the older brothers decided to patiently wait for the hero, and only then return home. However, the fourth brother seriously worried about the strange smell of blood. He was too saturated and caustic, as if he was exuded from somewhere from afar. The hero at this time wandered with a faithful dog in the forest, at least until they noticed the strange passage hidden in the forest more often. According to the alarmed reaction of the Black Ranger, it immediately became obvious something was definitely lurking behind this hidden passage. Therefore, the hero immediately put his increased power to try to open the secret door. However, an unexpectedly massive sash with a loud metallic sound slammed right behind him, cutting off the path to retreat. At this sinister moment, the system warned Liang Shi that the special mission of demonic hunting was activated. He had to complete it in order to earn the blessing of the custodian of the river. Each new stage of cultivation will bring him twice as many fruits for development. In addition, damage to water beings will increase by as many as 10%. While the hero carefully familiarized himself with system messages, the black dog growled loudly and anxiously. At that moment, Liang Shi distinguished the ominous silhouettes of mountain demons in impenetrable darkness. However, he did not expect them to be so many. The young man finally realized that the system wants him to exterminate all these monsters without exception. It would be impossible to get out of here without this. Therefore, the hero decided not to lose precious time. It's good at least that in recent weeks it has become much stronger. But he still did not know how long he could hold out in this grueling battle against the whole army of creatures. Then Liang Shi decided to fight in full force and as soon as possible to deal with all opponents. So gradually the progress of the mission began to slowly be filled. One task was replaced by another. When the first round was over, the bloodied guy decided to start the next test. This time, all the monsters attacked him at the same time, trying to break the impudent offender into pieces. Finally, when progress reached 31%, all the demons were defeated. However, unexpectedly, the hero heard someone's familiar voice. He was a man who clearly knew him. It turned out to be the very vile servant Zhong Xiang. He was extremely surprised that the orphan, which was pouring fish, was able to go so far into their sanctuary. In addition, the young man arrived very on time, because the man just prepared a special gift for him. In his hands was the father of the late mentor Li, and part-time, the senior student of their academy. The hero became frantic rabies, realizing the terrible of the situation, and warned the villain that his brothers were nearby. Today, if not himself, then someone else will certainly force this bastard to die with a painful death. However, the man grinned contemptuously on his angry words. And the next instant, the wall behind the hero was broken into small chips by unknown power. Then Liang Shi saw a huge monster, much more powerful and terrible than the fact that he heroically won earlier in the village. The old man only laughed angrily, making it clear that today it would be a decide who would kill whom. It would not at all Liang Shi. At the same time, when the first rays of bloody dawn touched the towers of a demonic citadel, the brothers were already racing through dense thickets of forests. None of the warriors could understand that the third brother was in such confusion and anxiety. Even the experienced archer of Hu Qi reminded his comrades that the demons previously met, barely reached the level of the skin barrier in cultivation. However, Brother Liu was afraid of completely different creatures. His soul was tormented by the fear that the ninth brother could face something much more terrifying. For example, with a demon of the level of the Horseman Force, whose power is capable of redrawing entire settlements with the ground. In this fateful moment, the young warrior realized the severity of his position. He fell into the most deadly trap since his rebirth. The hero's gaze glided along the hands of a monster, swollen, like barrels, along his absurdly huge body. Deep thoughts were not even required. This creature was approaching the power to the demon of the level of the horse. Nevertheless, the brave young man still considered madness to simply lay down a weapon. He experienced too much, fighting for the right to life, and now it would mean to capture the memory of all their trials. After all, as he perfectly understood, the danger is only one of the inevitable faces of its existence. Even his wretched, full of deprivation childhood failed to break his will. Therefore, he certainly does not flinch before such a threat. As a result, the brave warrior resolutely entered the battle against the gigantic monster. Watching how masterfully this boy fights, the old servant Zhong Xian could hardly believe that the young man had spent only 6 months in the clan. However, the evil minister nevertheless ordered his monstrous offspring to kill a daring man for his own good. In the next instant, the angry attack of the monster landed straight into the body of the defender. The hero crashed into stone fragments of the destroyed wall with force, tightly coughing into scarlet blood. Zhong Xiang only laughed contemptuously, boasting of his product, which surpassed all the most daring expectations. Only now the warrior fully realized that the difference in their strength with this opponent was truly monstrous. However, at this critical moment, the system informed him that he exceeded the temporary limits of demonic hunting. The mysterious force invited him to receive a well-deserved reward and merge with part of the imperial grace of the Keeper of the River. Then the young man did not yet understand how incredibly he was lucky. However, his luck was also a kind of true power. For this reason, he without hesitation activated the merger and immediately moved to an unknown place. The brave warrior stood right on the water surface and could not move. A huge dragon appeared in front of him, who asked the young man to think carefully about the upcoming fusion and not regret his choice. Suddenly, the brave man was in a strange body, in the guise of the Keeper of the River. The ancient spirit proudly stated that the violation of the laws of the universe was a direct search for death, and demanded from a huge being to surrender. However, the dragon was only angry even more, warning the young man not to blame him for his own death. This is how this gigantic monster raised its mouth, preparing for a deadly attack. The Keeper of the River prepared to repel this attack by naming the technique that he was going to use, the legendary rupture of the dragon. Meanwhile, in reality, Zhongxiang looked at the defeated Liang Shi, not understanding what he was counting on a similar weakly and how he could believe in victory. In addition, the insidious servant considered himself absolutely right in the decision to kill this upstart, because he did everything exclusively for the sake of survival. People are born either with luck or with a gold spoon in his mouth, the bastard thought, and he had only a foster monster son. He had to lay his bloody path up, having experienced a lot for the sake of the post of the main servant of this idiot. Lion Shi and everyone else would never have understood his suffering and victims. Therefore, the villain ordered his monstrous offspring to finally kill this impudent jerk. However, at this very instant, the hero's body, which sensed mortal danger, shone brightly with a golden light. After that, in the place where he lay, a powerful explosion occurred, and the earth was covered with deep cracks. Soon, a warrior, still in a semi-conscious state, rose to his feet, ready to resist any monster. At this time, memories surfaced a few days ago in his mind. Then he decided to find out from his mentor if he knows anything about the paths of the Crucible and Rainbow and how powerful they are. However, the wise teacher said that none of the living have ever seen a person of such an incredible power, so there is no exact information. However, the common people called these techniques by the divine ways, which already said a lot about their legendary power. In the next instant, the hero directed 2 fingers to the enemy and used the same dragon rupture technique. At that moment, all these miserable little people were in a space created by his incredible force. However, a self-confident servant considered that the warrior simply wanted to scare them with cheap tricks, and again ordered his son to attack. Nevertheless, the hero calmly turned his spear, hitting them on the ground. And then the body of the monster began to fly apart. Outwardly, it seemed that nothing happened to the monster itself, so Zhongxian was convinced that the enemy simply wanted to intimidate them. However, literally after a moment, the body of the giant began to gradually fall apart, as if pieces of flesh burst out of it. Obviously, the monster immediately screamed, turning to his father and not understanding what was happening to him. He did not even have a time to come close enough to his father. His body finally evaporated. And then a man in grief realized that he had absolutely nothing left in this cruel world. At that moment, Lion Shi unconscious collapsed onto the cold land. The distraught servant grabbed the stone, deciding to take revenge on such an impudent. But at this critical moment, the wall exploded. Someone decided to intervene in their duel. These were 3 brothers who were incredibly lucky to find a hidden room here. They also saw the younger comrade unconscious, not understanding what happened to him. One thing was visible. A very serious battle ensued here, the traces of which eloquently spoke of his fierce. Zhongxiang himself did not understand what to do now and how to escape from this trap. At this moment, the brothers, not noticing his presence, decided to take out his younger brother, and then search this sinister place. It was the perfect chance for an insidious servant, and he was going to use it. However, suddenly someone loudly called him from the back. This was one of the people in the hoodies, who could not find his family, a daughter and wife. The man was extremely dissatisfied with such a rude tone, and recalled that it was the servant here that was the main one. However, this was not at all interested in the distraught from the grief of his father. He was ready to strangle the villain with his own hands. As a result, the main servant calmly explained that he had not seen their relatives. Perhaps they were lost somewhere in the reigning chaos. And, contemptuously grinning, he added that they could also devour the mountain demons, whom they released into the wild. The unfortunate man could not endure such a mocking tone. He immediately ripped at his throat the main servant. He wanted to send him to the underworld so that he paid for all the sins that he created. He himself, leaving the way, decided not to give up, because his family could still be alive somewhere in these damned dungeons. In this moment, the hero's consciousness was still in that mysterious space. He felt the strongest pain, as if his whole body was torn into the smallest pieces. And at that moment, the very Keeper of the River looked straight at him, as if looking into the very soul. Suddenly, the young man jumped out of his bed, awakening like a nightmare. He ended up in the cozy room of the estate of his teacher. It was strange, given that recently he fought with a mountain demon, but it seems that this battle ended when he was disconnected. The older brothers came to save him. The warrior also recalled that he received a reward for the completion of demonic hunting. She significantly improved his characteristics, therefore, picking up a spear, he decided to check it. The young man also noticed a striking difference compared to the past. He began to understand much better how his body functions. In addition, he felt the point of boiling, which literally seethed in it, and he felt a flame spilled throughout the body. It was 3 inches in thickness and about 2 feet in length, so he could begin to improve the flesh. Initially, the hero cultivated only 2 months, but has already reached the beginning of the second barrier thanks to his unique system. However, at that moment, a creak of the door rang out into his room. It was the older brother of Hu Qi, who was clearly surprised that their younger comrade was so cheerful immediately after awakening. The warrior immediately bowed to respect these two. However, the brothers asked the hero to avoid excessive formalities. They came to ask about what happened there in a secret hall. Then Lian Shi realized that the older brothers apparently did not know about that monster, so he decided not to talk about him. Otherwise, uncomfortable questions will arise about his incredibly increased strength. So he made it clear that he had lost consciousness by defeating the last mountain demon sent by Zliu Junxian. The brothers were surprised because they also found the servant himself dead. This struck the hero, because he certainly did not have time to kill him. Perhaps someone watched them there and took advantage of the chaotic situation in order to deal with the villain. However, it was surprising why one of the people Zhongxiana decided to help him. At this moment, the wise Hu Qi asked the hero not to worry about anything. They themselves will go to the teacher and make a detailed report, and he should have enough sleep and restore strength. In addition, they heard from the workers that the hero's house by this moment was finished to rebuild. Lian Shi was very surprised, because he did not remember that this was in his plans. Soon he reached his native village and saw that his modest house had turned into a whole magnificent estate. The workers immediately respectfully greeted Mr. Liang Shi. The young man was very embarrassed by the fact that his uncle addresses him so respectfully, so he asked him not to show him such respect and behave as before. However, the wise elder of the village reminded the hero that he saved them all. It was the smallest gratitude to which they could thank him. Residents also collected a little money for their defender as a sign of gratitude. However, the noble boy decisively refused the gift. He wanted these funds to be spent on 2-time food for workers, and the remains after construction were divided between everyone. After all, he perfectly understood that in their parts, rice was sometimes even more expensive than meat. Simple workers were struck by the nobility of the master. He turned out to be not only a generous, but also a generous person. The young man was very confused by all these sincere praises. Therefore, he decided to change the subject and find out from the head man how things were going in the village. As it turned out, thanks to the feat of the hero, the clan Yang sent 3 guards to them to protect. True, their faces scared a little. These warriors were too serious and harsh. That the hero, however, was not surprising at all, given their combat past. In fact, looking around the people crowded around, he could not imagine how his late father reacted when he saw all this now. The young man swore that his life would be not in vain because the parent fought very much for her, protecting his son from all adversity. It is time to finally visit a lotus pond. The last time his boat crashed into chips, and if he wants to continue to fish, he will have to buy a new one. Also, from the moment of awakening, the warrior has been waiting for this moment in order to test his increased forces. Previously, he thought that walking on water was only naive dreams and fairy tales. But in that vision, he watched his own eyes as the keeper of the river really stepped on the water surface. And now the water element also submitted to him. It was a truly amazing feeling of freedom and power. Somewhere at the same time, the head of the noble family of Zhou, having fallen to his knees, began to beg for forgiveness from a formidable messenger. He did not know what to do now. The main shelter was captured by enemies, and his best servant died. More than 100 mountain demons destroyed without any mercy. However, the messenger only pushed away the miserable aristocrat away, indignant that he could only whine and complain. He was clearly disappointed with how they were discovered, because the operation was almost completed. But everything was irrevocably spoiled. In addition, it was not the only fallen citadel in their network. At least the fact that the cult still had enough materials to create new pearls of strength. The mysterious emissary also ordered the lord to immediately prepare the boat. They needed to return to the main sanctuary of the cult as soon as possible. The aristocrat leaning in a bow promised that by tomorrow morning all preparations would be completed, and thanked Mr. the Messenger for his generosity and wise leadership in such difficult times. As soon as the terrible messenger left the estate, the young Zhou Heiyuan noticed how his powerful father suddenly became sad. The eldest man only calmly looked at the tree, which he planted 5 years ago. The tree never fruit, but even despite this, he never dared to cut it off. This plant was of particular value to him. Even without fruits, it attracted a variety of birds that the family ate every day. Ptashki such as former servants Zhongxiang, Li Guyong, and Li Xiaohu were also born in order to become food for predators. It was a natural selection, a ruthless law of nature. Only then, the quick-witted Zhou Heiyuan realized what the true essence of what was happening was. Apparently, the fact that Zhongxiang went to the shelter was the work of his far-sighted father. However, the wise man calmly explained the simple truth to his son. All the trees in the end rot and die. You can't rely on them forever because time is merciless to all living things. And the cult of the mother of demons has long turned into a rotten tree, which is about to collapse under the weight of his own decomposition. Therefore, the father handed over a small box to his heir and asked to do everything possible to convey it to the hero this morning. As it turned out, they had a trip to the prosperous Hangzhou today. They will leave all the troubles behind, and completely different people will already deal with the consequences. Soon the hero returned to his native walls of the Yang clan. The students whispered excitedly among themselves, because they heard incredible rumors that the warrior alone killed a good dozen bloodthirsty monsters. Moreover, these were creatures who devoured people without any pity. Such conversations were insanely embarrassed by the modest hero, but he perfectly understood. For sure it was the work of the fourth older brother, who loved to embellish combat feats. Just at that moment, on a spacious training site, the young man saw all four comrades. They immediately joyfully called the hero and showed him what they sent from the estate. To the great surprise of the warrior, in the elegant box there were letters, as well as valuable land documents. As it turned out, these papers cost about 2.5 silver lanes, a very impressive amount. The head of the family pretended that it provides this as a sincere apology. The rest of the jewelry were gifts for all the brothers participating in the operation. Experienced warriors were convinced. The Lord turned out to be a completely difficult and far-sighted person. Also, in a detailed letter, everything was indicated about the ways of retreating the cult of the Mother of Demons, the departure time and methods of secret connection with them. Now the brothers realized, perhaps the temple where they visited was deliberately issued as a bait. If this is true, then the cunning idea of the chapter was very difficult to fully understand and calculate. At this time, the older brother decided to report about everything that is happening to the wise teacher, and find out what they should do next. But it is unlikely that the mentors will give these villains just to escape and hide from fair retaliation. Returning to the events of the month ago, the old man Leo calmly walked around the quiet village, choosing a provisions for his beloved wife. All local residents were amazed at how much a caring and attentive husband he was, how reverently treated his companion of life. At this time, the man walked slowly around the market, realizing that he had to hurry. Otherwise, his wife or child will be hungry waiting for his return. At this point, he almost reached his boat moored away from the hustle and bustle. However, at this fatal moment, an unknown villain dared to attack him. The food supposedly intended for the spouse fell out of the hands of the unfortunate and flooded with scarlet blood. However, soon the man, all and unharmed, rose to his feet, continuing his path to his awaiting wife. Behind him was a terrible corpse, whose body was completely devoid of any skin, as if all living things were ripped off from it to the last fiber. Exactly a month passed from this nightmare. Today was the very fatal day that the mysterious messenger of the cult spoke to him. It was a time when he had to finally deal with his wife and daughter, sacrifice them to dark forces. However, the demonic voice inside him only sarcastically mocked that a weak person could not decide on it. Therefore, the sinister creature graciously agreed to help him in such a delicate matter. The unfortunate man desperately began to wash himself with cold water, trying to cool his flaming head, and demanded that this unknown voice leave him alone. However, the demonic essence was only contemptuously laughed. A miserable old man could not get rid of him, because now they were one inseparable whole. At this time, Lion Shi, along with the fourth brother, came to this boatman. Seeing that he still works and accepts passengers, they calmly explained that they need to cross the wide river to the opposite shore. The man immediately courted the battered hat and invited his respected guests to climb aboard his modest boat. At this touching moment, his wife and little daughter said goodbye to her husband and father, wishing him a successful voyage. Lion Shi also calmly stood on a swinging boat, not giving the appearance that he was trying to find or look out. In addition, it was necessary to maintain a readiness for battle, because the brothers reasonably suspected that this outwardly harmless old man could be one of the dangerous cultists. At that moment, the fourth brother began to attend the man at ease about his wife and daughter. When the carrier began to talk about these two, an experienced warrior only grinned. A demon in someone else's skin could not talk so naturally and warmly about strangers. Obviously, a cunning man who took someone else's personality tried to make an innocent look that he did not understand what the master was talking about. And then it became extremely clear. They will have to tear off his skin from him to force the whole truth. Then the old man screamed angrily. He just had to hold out for only one more day. Then he would not have to kill anyone and shed innocent blood. But since these fools dared to intervene in his affairs, he simply had to destroy them. A protective aura flashed around the lawn of Shi at this tense moment, and the fourth brother decisively came down with the enemy in close combat. The hero acted as a reliable insurance, attacking an insidious man from behind his comrade. The fourth brother contemptuously gave the impudent to understand that they were numerically superior to him. A lone enemy could not hold out for a long time against such a coordinated couple. However, no one said that the demon was completely alone here. Here, his sinister comrades have already raised from river depths. First of all, one of them immediately entrusted the hero's hands with iron chains, about to drag under cold water. A monster who rushed to the fourth student explained that the guards of the Mother of Demons are always alone in sight, while the second is hidden in dark depths. This underwater killer specializes in secret murders, and if the boy does not deal with him quickly, then within 5 minutes the boy will choke and die in torment. At this critical moment, the hero plunged to the very bottom of the river. The insidious man gloatingly understood. The lungs of this youth should already explode from the lack of air, because the underwater kingdom was exclusively its territory and elements. However, how much he was surprised when, pulling the heavy chains, the enemy threw him to a rocky bottom. Liangsha calmly explained that after his inner strength reached 70%, he thought for a long time about how to immerse himself deep underwater. Therefore, the warrior sincerely thanked the man for such a rare opportunity to test himself in combat conditions. Then he calmly added that the water element was precisely his native territory, and not by the lair of the enemy. At that moment, a desperate man painfully remembered his tragic past. From the youngest age, he knew that in this cruel world there were no fair gods. If they really existed, they would probably decide to save the innocent sufferers. However, the heavenly forces never answered their desperate prayers and the call, so his fate developed in such a sad way. They say that the true God can be seen only on the very threshold of death. And it seemed that this battle would be from those fatal ones when he finally understands who the real God is. But now the cultist was going to frantically fight for his life, because his main advantage was an incredible speed of movement. This swiftness was quite enough to kill an inexperienced boy with one exact blow. However, unexpectedly, when he extended his clawed paw to the enemy, the guy masterfully used the aqua verk technique, hitting the demon right along the jaw. Of course, it was amazing that the goal just disappeared from sight, moreover, given that the cultist was at the mighty stage of the horse in cultivation. At that moment, the villain grabbed him behind the chain of the hero, pulled him to him, after which he painfully hit him again. From this blow, the man painfully crashed into a solid rocky bottom of the river. Now the brave hero realized that underwater to cope with someone the level of the horse was not as difficult as he was afraid. He was more worried about how his older brother's things were going on the surface, because soon it would be necessary to return to the boat. In the last moment, the dying cultist with horror realized that his brother was absolutely right. The true God can really be seen only on the threshold of imminent death. At this time, the old man was already thoroughly beaten and tightly tied on the surface. However, he only mocked ominously, because by this moment the boy underwater certainly had to die at the hands of the underwater killer. How much he was mistaken! Literally after a moment, the brave guy had already got out of the cold river depths, deftly climbing onto the board of the boat. He calmly explained that the moron that attacked him absorbed a huge river monster. The hero also decided to make a convincing appearance that he was on the last gasp, so as not to seem too strong to his comrades and not to cause unnecessary suspicions. At that moment, the toothy crocodile Tahua continued to spin near the boat, terrifying his formidable look. Looking at this ferocious beast, the fourth brother was in a real shock. How the youngest of them was incredibly lucky to get out of the water alive. So soon the travelers safely reached the opposite shore, where they gave out a bound man to local security. The prisoner only looked at his unsuspecting family again with the last darling gaze again. However, his wife and daughter endowed him with hateful, disgusting glances, seeing off on his last journey. Looking at this sad scene, the hero with his brother could only agree that this cultist was not particularly strong in battle. Most likely he belonged to an inexperienced young generation of minions. As you know, the warrior of 100th level of a ferocious tiger can live 120 years, and the immortal one, even longer. However, since the fall of the great Qing dynasty, 60 long years have passed. The older generation of the cultists still holds and resists, the average is almost dead, and immortal masters appear only in the most extreme cases. This means that the brothers have just met inexperienced young animals, and not the main backbone of the ominous cult. The most dangerous in this organization was precisely the elite, ancient masters who have accumulated incredible power over the centuries. At this time, a mysterious ruler of the cult wandered in the distance. After so many years of devoted membership in the organization, working hard and improving daily, he finally got the great technique of blood victims. However, the cult was catastrophically lacking new talents. He needed fresh forces and capable students. And now the mystical pill of wolf smoke was his main and last hope for success. However, at this tense moment of the mysterious man, someone boldly attacked. He deftly fought off the wooden pillar flying into it, carefully looking around the unexpected attackers. The older brothers calmly introduced themselves to the students of the famous Yang clan. After that, the two of them adoptedly attacked the cultist, inflicting a couple of powerful crushing blows to him. After the first of them, his brother Liu realized with anxiously, their enemy is approximately at a dangerous level of wolf smoke in cultivation. Therefore, he immediately warned his older brother that it would be a rather complicated and exhausting battle. The experienced archer of the Hu Qi was amazed that the enemy withstood the crushing blow of the comrade, left almost without a single scratch. At that moment, the cultist only laughed contemptuously, because in the first instant he thought that perhaps someone really powerful came behind him. Therefore, only calmly shook himself off from dust. The ominous magician warned the uninvited guests that they certainly would not leave alive. At this critical moment, the man spread around him the raging energy of Qi. The warrior, on the other hand, pulled out heavy columns from the stone foundation of the building and threw them into his enemies with monstrous power. However, such primitive tricks could not seriously harm him or stop experienced fighters. At that moment, the well-aimed brother of Hu Q already awarded the cultist by a couple of poisoned arrows. Of course, the enemy easily stopped them, although the arrows were skillfully made. The man perfectly understood that such children's tricks could not break even his protective aura. However, the experienced archer of Hu Qi only made a meaningfully laugh. One of his arrows will be more than enough for the plan. As soon as a self-confident man caught a flying shell, the arrow unexpectedly opened, releasing some caustic blinding smoke right into his eyes. At that fateful moment when the cultist was temporarily without vision, the elder brother quickly rushed to his attack. As a result, a blinded man with a loud roar fell heavily to the ground of a spacious estate. He painfully realized that most likely the enemies were able to calculate him because of the betrayal of Lord Zhou. Otherwise, they would not have found him in this secret shelter in his life. However, all the same, he cannot let them go alive and healthy. The cultist took out his cherished pill of strength. However, at that moment, the precious tablet was definitely affected by an arrow and scattered into small fragments. The well-aimed Hu Qi made it clear that the enemy no longer had a spare option, so the brothers generously invited him to surrender without unnecessary bloodshed. Then the defeated man with bitterness realized that the bastard told the opponents even about this secret. However, no one said that the broken pill was true and the only one. At that moment, the real pill was already in his mouth, slowly dissolving. The next moment, his powerful body began to pour incredible energy, as if lightning streams passed through each vein. Then a wild, primitive aura dancing around, from which it became difficult to even breathe freely. Now the revived enemy was absolutely sure. These naive jerks would not be able to survive against the highest stage of destructive wolf smoke. Somewhere at the same time, two other brothers were already closing to the nearest large city. The luxurious estate of the Zhao family was supposed to be right along this wide street. They needed to hurry pretty so as not to be late for the decisive battle. The closer the warriors came to the estate, the more clearly they felt terrifying primitive energy. The fourth brother anxiously found out. This ominous aura came from the place where the third brother fought. So the comrades were in mortal danger. At this critical moment, a powerful explosion that shook the earth occurred on the territory of the luxurious estate. Brother Liu looked intensely at the approaching enemy. Now, judging by his terrible appearance, it was difficult to say whether he was still a man or already turned into a real demon. Obviously, the obsessed follower of the cult was extremely struck by the arrogance of some boy. However, he calmly explained to the enemies a simple truth. It was these students and the like that were guilty that the descendants of the last great dynasty became such despicable outcasts. The cultist painfully remembered how ruthless soldiers attacked their peaceful city in his youth and burned him to the ground, without sparing neither women nor children. However, his beloved mother was mortally wounded, so she asked to run without her and return to their mother's goddess, so that at least he would survive. Soon, the unfortunate one fell into the gloomy temple of the Mother of Demons, where the highest members severely reminded that each of them should give his life to the glory of the lord of their sinister cult. They also perfectly understood that such a rootless boy to survive in this cruel world was extremely difficult. However, he interrupted many innocent people in order to achieve his bloody path of power. From now on, he became their devoted student and also received a new demonic name. At this intense moment, while the brothers desperately fought with the monster, the skilled archer of the Hu-Chi tried in vain to aim for a decisive shot. However, I could not do this because of the constant movement of the fighters. At that moment, he heard the long-awaited familiar voices. 2 younger brothers hastily joined them. Then, in a hurry, Hu-Chi explained that he could not help his older brother because of the risk of getting into a comrade. However, the 4th brother was the archer much more skillful and experienced, so he understood that this responsible business can be completely entrusted to him. The young warrior carefully watched the destructive power of Wolf Smoke. She really was monstrously powerful. Even the wise older brother understood that he would not last long in this exhausting battle. He urgently needed to look for a weak point of such a monster. The vulnerable point was supposed to be somewhere near the heart. It was obliged to open this place for the sake of younger brothers, risking his own life. At this decisive moment, an arrow whistled behind his tense back. Strange, because this time the energy of the shell of the 4th brother was as if noticeably weaker than usual. At that moment, the cultist only laughed contemptuously. As he had already said earlier, their miserable arrows were nothing more than children's toys for him. Only now the smart guy understood. The 4th brother simply distracted the insidious enemy on purpose. Therefore, the senior warrior prepared significantly more energy for a crushing attack, fully trusting the younger comrade. As a result, he powerfully hit the demon with a clawed paw directly into the center of his broad chest. It was the perfect moment when the enemy was inadvertently opened for a counterattack. The 4th brother took advantage of this. As a result, he released a deadly arrow, reinforced by his emerald aura of maximum concentration. The cultist remembered how, in distant childhood, he came to a wise teacher with a naive question. Why can't they just live under the affectionate sun? After all, they were only the remnants of the past great dynasty. However, the mentor calmly explained to the young student that in this cruel era, there was no place for them due to the fact that someone ruthlessly took away the inheritance belonging to them. However, he solemnly promised that one day they would definitely avenge all the humiliation. But unfortunately, the unfortunate man failed to avenge the unfortunate man. After all, his heart was already pierced by a deadly arrow. Only then, the observant hero realized that the first shots of the 4th brother were intentionally weakened in order to cunningly deceive the self-confident enemy. Apparently, the cultist then thought that it was precisely the inexperienced Hu-Chi, and they were quite weak. The second arrow was as saturated with the destructive force of the level of the horse, which was possessed by the 4th brother. Therefore, the smart hero realized he still has a lot to learn to become as skillful and strong as his older brothers. Finally, the fierce battle was completely completed, so the wise older brother ordered to tightly connect this dangerous man with steel chains. These special shackles were just specially made in order to reliably restrain the destructive power of the level of wolf smoke. In addition, all those present were sincerely amazed. The man remained in full consciousness, even after his heart was pierced through the deadly arrow. The brothers saw how the young hero at that moment looked frightened, and good-naturedly asked him not to faint with fear. After that, the 4th brother calmly explained that these vile cultists love to keep subordinate demons with them to strengthen their own power. However, the dying man only bitterly explained that they were neither people nor demons in the full sense. It is unlikely that these pampered youths have ever lived in a raw cave, into which not a single ray of sunlight is penetrated. It is unlikely that they someday tried to get out of a deep pit littered with decaying corpses. All that he sincerely wanted was just living under the warm sun. Such spoiled boobs like these students never understand this. However, the 4th brother threatened the man menacingly so that he immediately ceases to build an innocent victim of circumstances. His bloody deeds destroyed hundreds of peaceful families. Many sons lost their mothers, and many fathers lost their favorite daughters. Because of his tragic past, he did not deserve a drop of pity or sympathy. Nobody cares about his mental torment at all! All the brothers wanted is to break his impudent neck and throw his rotten heart on the feed by homeless dogs. Obviously, the hero was puzzled by why the 4th brother was so sharply and violently angry. And then the older brother, who understands the older brother, explained that the 4th brother was one of the many orphans whose parents brutally died at the hands of ruthless cultists. However, fortunately, the wise older brother stopped the angry 4th in time, explaining that it was still alive to take this valuable captive to the clan for interrogation. As a result, this had to reluctantly stop and move away, so as not to create anything irreparable with the villain. However, at that moment, a caring brother suggested that the youngest, after the successful completion of a difficult task, go to drink together and relax properly. The experienced Hu-Chi wisely invited the 4th brother to practice in shooting in order to release accumulated anger and rage. Looking at how everyone sincerely consoled the 4th brother, The hero's heart was seized with some pleasant, unfamiliar feeling. For him, it was a perfect novelty because before he had never experienced this, and they looked like a real friendly family. And of course, the brothers cordially invited Lian Shi to go to the celebration with them. He was sincerely glad that he was not separated from the general fun. The young man was indeed a full part of this cohesive company. Somewhere at the same time, his little friends peacefully rested in a cozy lotus cave. However, at that moment, a tiny pet heard in his head a strict voice of the master, who demanded that the kids do not cool idle. Therefore, rubbing his sleepy eyes, he took his small handbag and went to fulfill the order of the master. The kid was determined and energy in order to deserve the long-awaited praise of the owner this time. Just at that moment, he noticed a mythical fish floating by a rare beauty. Therefore, a little cannibal immediately quickly flew into this baby. However, unfortunately, he clumsily crashed into a sharp underwater stone, and the cunning fish successfully sailed away from danger. The baby himself with annoyance realized that he could not take his true, more powerful form. The gentleman strictly asked them not to transform without extreme need, so that people did not accidentally notice them and would not begin a dangerous hunt. He also wisely advised the pets to try to move their brains if gross physical strength does not help in performing their delicate task. Therefore, the smart baby Chonka immediately jumped joyfully, starting to feverishly invent a brilliant plan of action. He soon skillfully changed clothes, disguised as a real mythical fish, and tried to seduce his careless goal. However, she turned out to be really extremely smart and cautious. The very surprised fish soon tried to quietly hide from the field of view. At this time, noticing the complete failure of a comrade, the rest of the funny pets laughed loudly, mercilessly ridiculing their unlucky friend. Therefore, he immediately had to swim quickly in order to somehow survive this burning shame. Meanwhile, the hero continued to train hard on the vast territory of the clan. When the soldiers figured out a dangerous opponent, the mistress generously rewarded them with silver, confiscated from the luxurious estate of the lord. They were given 150 silver wrappers to each participant, and the metal was an extraordinary pure sample. Of course, Liangshi was sincerely amazed at the incredible generosity of the lady. Typically, the standard ingot was equal to 50 lands, and in this jewel there were as many as 52.5. Consequently, he received about 57 pure silver lands, a very impressive amount. After that, the brothers continued to methodically clean up cultist shelters throughout the district. Thanks to these dangerous missions, the hero's power has increased significantly. Although in the flesh he had not yet reached a breakthrough, he had very little left to the cherished goal. The young man perfectly understood. The day is not far off when he would become even more powerful and more skillful in martial arts. At that moment, the elder brother carefully watched the student's successes. The teacher recently returned from an important trip, so he came to call the youngest to discuss combat merits and give out well-deserved awards. Of course, Liangshi was pleasantly surprised. He sincerely believed that the monetary reward was quite enough for the work done. Soon everyone gathered with a captive who swore brutally killing each of the brothers. Especially violently, he threatened the traitor to the lord. The brothers clearly did not really want to dine in the company of such vile cases. However, the wise lady ordered this way. It was not clear what was happening on her mind at that moment. However, the brothers decided to discuss the fact that one of the comrades was not on the estate for a long time. As it turned out, he spent all this time in another important and secret task. Lian Shi at that time was sincerely struck by the mistress. He did not expect that she would organize such a luxurious feast for them. Surely such a celebration cost a lot of money. Only then did one of the brothers realize. Their youngest still did not know what the name was, the mistress, because he constantly turned to her simply according to the title. Her surname Hu, and the name is Kan Zhou. Her noble ancestors were held by high posts of ministers and even the chief secretary of the empire. The madam was once introduced to the terrible commander-in-chief of the troops with their wise teacher, and her influential father is none other than an important official of the third rank at the imperial palace. Even her marriage with the teacher could well be considered a profitable political alliance, although it is clear that neither the lady nor her spouse mentor would really like such frank phrases. Soon, dear gentlemen, they arrived at their devoted disciples. The teacher calmly thanked his wards for his zealous efforts, and pointing to the bound captives, warned that they would soon be transferred into the hands of fair authorities. However, the men only grinned contemptuously. They did not care whether the enemies could tear off their skin or not. Indeed, in their powerful cult, there will be sure to be those who decide to take revenge for them bloody. However, the wise master only condescendingly remarked, they will still not understand the principles of the true balance of forces. Therefore, the cultists were the real blind in this complex world. All this time, the man was alive only because he benefited for interrogations. Otherwise, the teacher would not allow him to breathe for a second longer than the necessary. The mentor also warned the students that after a fair trial over the cultists, they would be generously rewarded for excellent service. However, for Liang Shi, the youngest of the students, the master has something special. He handed the young man an elegant chest. It was a gift from his older brother. The parcel was delivered only yesterday, and the hero looked with sincere surprise at this small but obviously valuable box. Shortly before that, the older brother discussed with his faithful assistant that he fought for so long and stubbornly to get this rare thing. And now I wanted to give her a younger brother with all my heart. His warriors were extremely surprised. They perfectly understood that the younger brother was incredibly lucky. Even for years they looked at this priceless gift. The eldest guy only laughed good-naturedly, not understanding what exactly the subordinates touched. Apparently they were offended and believed that the younger brother was his obvious favorite. However, in order to console the loyal warriors, he generously suggested this time a drink for a successful task at his expense. The sender himself thought about how his younger brother would appreciate his precious gift. As soon as Lion Shu carefully opened the box, bluish mystical energy immediately began to ooze from it immediately. When he looked inside, he did not believe his eyes. There was a real spiritual weapon. Any spiritual weapon is completely unique. Its amazing abilities develop with the owner. Therefore, such a high status in weapons art is rightly given to this weapon. Owning such a blade is an incredible luck for a simple fighter. Only the rarest and talented blacksmith is able to cope with the creation of such a miracle. And now the hero had two spiritual weapons. He also carefully read the name skillfully carved on the blade, Azure Wolf. This noble blade could completely block his weakness in close combat. Now the warrior will be able to fight perfectly in any combat situation. Soon, the solemn dinner was over. And because of all this turmoil, the hero missed several important lessons, so he decided to return to diligent studies. However, suddenly he heard some familiar sounds. It seems that someone has studied a complex phonetic system. Entering the class, he saw his teacher, who sincerely rejoiced that the hero finally visited them. Of course, Lion Shishinli apologized for a long absence. However, the wise man perfectly understood what exactly the boy was doing recently. Then good-naturedly suggested going and see how the students independently learned a difficult phonetic system of writing. Soon they moved a little deeper to the territory of a prestigious school. There in a cozy office, there was a respectable abbot of the educational institution, who honestly admitted to the guy that his brilliant system impressed him to the very depths of his soul. Lian Shi immediately bowed respectfully, sincerely thanking the abbot for such a flattering praise. However, the wise old man wanted to avoid excessive formalities, and asked the boy to carefully look at their own development. The hero was pleasantly amazed at what he saw. In this advanced version of the hieroglyphs, there were fewer characters than he proposed initially. Instead of 76, there were only 63. Among them are 23 syllables, the last 24 and 16 especially valuable signs. The wise old man really managed to talentedly process and significantly improve the proposed writing system. Lian Shi immediately thanked the abbot. He was sincerely amazed that he created the version even much more perfect than the proposed by himself. As it turned out, the venerable abbot was completely delighted with the mind of Liang Shu. It is not known how much more they continued to explain complex hieroglyphs by other hieroglyphs in an infinite cycle. The hero's teacher proudly explained that with the recommendation of an influential rector, a lot of previously inaccessible doors will open before the boy. The hero bowed gratefully again. He perfectly understood that having powerful people behind him was extremely useful in this world. However, the young man became curious. Who studied his own wise teacher? And then the man realized that he had never called the boy the name of this outstanding person. As you know, at the very top of the pyramid of power, the almighty emperor was sitting, and under it were 3 powerful directors, 2 important pavilions, and 5 great academicians. His teacher was none other than Li Ho, one of the 5 great academicians of the empire. In his detailed letter, the mentor also enthusiastically spoke about the system proposed by the hero. So the man was absolutely sure. The academician will be able to convince even the emperor himself to be worthy of rewarding the young inventor. Indeed, of course, the culture and the Shang are very ancient and venerable, but this does not mean that it is closed for new trends. The Lian Shi system will help the empire confidently keep up with the times and progress. However, the hero also understood that in addition to the teacher of his mentor, there were 4 more people of the same high level. In addition, no one knew how the emperor and other dignitaries would react to his daring proposal. But the wise mentor knowingly noted that he should not be particularly worried about the reaction of his majesty. After all, the ruler has always generously encouraged new, progressive ideas and bold undertakings. Somewhere at the same time, events are rapidly moving to the imperial palace itself. The powerful emperor carefully listened to the report of the academician. after which he calmly released the courtiers home for a well-deserved rest. However, at this important moment, one of the remaining servants decided to tell something to Imperial Majesty. He wanted to show the ruler a new method of studying complex hieroglyphs. This was just the same influential official from the pavilion, the teacher of the hero's mentor, who appeared with the revolutionary phonetic system. However, one of the conservative academics considered such an offer by a real absurdity. How could you dare to replace the ancient methods tested by centuries for some senseless nonsense? They also reminded the great academician Li that he should remember well what was based on the culture of their great nation and its indestructible traditions. However, one of the men only displeasedly reminded the rest of the stubborn old people that there was such an important concept as reform. He also explained that, according to his deep conviction, the phonetic system is much better than the archaic that they used earlier. All those present were amazed and believed that Mr. Su was definitely darkened by reason. He will defeat the memory of the ancestors themselves. It is unlikely that anyone would dare to say this during the reign of the powerful Qin dynasty. However, the wise old man reminded the academicians of something important. Now the reign of the dynasty in Shah, so it was simply incorrect and inappropriate to constantly mention Qin's fallen dynasty. At this intense moment, the emperor resolutely ordered them to shut up immediately. He did not want to see their barren bokushin and empty disputes. The ruler also decided to find out from the academician Li why he so highly appreciates this innovation. Then the venerable old minister explained that this progressive method can be used to create a strong basis of the entire state. Such loud and bold words could not but interest the penetrating emperor. He wanted to hear specific details. Then the wise old man explained that if Shan does not open the way to the necessary changes, everything can endlessly end in the same way as with the Qin dynasty. When His Majesty was still young and full of strength, he personally participated in the bloody campaigns against the northern barbarians. He also traveled to the southern provinces, all in order to deeper to know the lives of ordinary people and their pressing needs. And the sovereign was much more afraid of destructive stagnation, but not reasonable reforms and progressive changes. The last archaic method consisted of 400 initial hieroglyphs and more than 1,000 final symbols. The emperor asked the officials a direct question. How long does it take for an ordinary person to learn at least half of the hieroglyphs from all this array? Everyone immediately fell silent and began to whisper anxiously among themselves. The old academician understood. At least 5 long years of persistent study went on. However, the phonetic method would allow to achieve the same result in just 6 months. Of course, everyone whispered even louder, considering it to be complete nonsense and impossible affirmation. However, the wise academician invited them to independently verify the truth of their words in practice. He also explained to the interested emperor that this brilliant method was invented by a talented student, a young man named Lion Shi. Despite the fact that he is an ordinary fisherman from a simple family, the boy was extremely smart. Therefore, the man believed that his incredible contribution to the development of culture is worthy of a reward, even an honorary noble status. The emperor was clearly interested in this unusual boy and his amazing abilities. However, to begin with, this revolutionary system had to be carefully tested in practice. Therefore, he ordered her to try out on the 6th prince, after which everyone respectfully dispersed about their business. Soon the master from the Yang clan received an imperial order to check the pattern of the fate of the mysterious boy. Most likely, the ruler was interested in a full and detailed report on Liang Shi, and the pattern of fate is extremely important information for any martial artist. Of course, this mystical pattern did not completely determine the fate of a person, but he could still tell a lot about his potential. People with a unique pattern of fate are literally blessed by the heavens themselves. They are protected by a powerful fortune. As you know, fate is not predetermined by the sky in advance, but obeys the complex laws of the universe. The wind turns the tiger into a dragon, and the water makes an ordinary daughter a lord of powerful creatures. The higher the level of fate in a person, the greater achievements he is able to achieve. And if he is a warrior, the more his combat abilities are developing. Also, by fate, you can learn a lot about the future path. If a person acts in accordance with her, everything goes easier and faster, as if the sky itself helps him. People with a high level of fate usually have 2 seals of fate, direct and indirect. For example, the youngest holy warrior carries both seals at once at the same time. The direct seal is the divine mountain, and the indirect is the demon of the devourer, extremely dangerous and ominous. This means that on his way to glory, he will go through terrible troubles and deadly trials. Indeed, 13 years after this prediction, he was attacked by the soldiers of the northern wasteland. Alone, he fought valiantly with 3 true giants, killed 2 and wounded 1 heavily. Another holy warrior, Yansi, possessed the fate of the Great Stone Mountain. He went through the thorny path in the wild mountains to the highest level of the holy warrior, regaining his youth and strength. But, unfortunately, he was too stubborn and did not obey the highest will, so he was killed by his sworn enemy. Where these two powerful warriors fought, the earth was abundantly politically. Local living creatures, having experienced this mystical power, began to gradually turn into spirits or demons. But it is important to remember, fate does not freeze forever. It is constantly changing, and people are able to influence each other's fate through their actions. The hero became extremely interesting. How could he recognize his own fate? The most important thing in this complex business is ash from the special incense of fate. It can accurately determine fate, but only if it is fragrant incense burned after activation of fateful powder. The longer it is overtaken by heavenly blessing, the better and more precisely the result of fortune telling. The master specially for the new year got the incense of fate for the hero, which was stored for 5 years in a sacred place. But alas, only one important component is lacking: the blood of great precious fish. This creature, born of nature itself, is originally endowed with heavenly fate. His blood is filled with special luck and powerful blessing. Without it, the ritual cannot be completed successfully. However, the master has already instructed his people to find out about this rare creation. Now everything depended only on luck and luck. Lion Shu did not know what exactly the master could help him. However, if the case concerned the search for precious fish, then he was a real professional in this area. But at first, he needed to buy a suitable travel ship. For this, the hero went to a busy pier. His old boat was smashed to smithereens when he became an involuntary witness to the fierce battle of two powerful spirits. Finally, he found a suitable store with a variety of ships. Now the boat sale business in this area was almost completely under the control of an influential fishing guild. Those who cannot afford to buy their own ship rent it from the guild on favorable terms. At that moment, the elderly merchant realized that the young man wanted to look for a boat. He explained that he has one new one. It was covered with special tongue butter and shone like a real beauty. It looked just great, the price of it was quite pleasant, and the first 3 months of rent were completely interest-free. Lion Shi saw. This boat really looked very worthy. But an experienced eye noticed that many ships here were converted from the old ones. Apparently, the owners were forced to rent battered boats, pretending them for new ones. However, suddenly someone joyfully called the hero by name. It was Mr. Li, who was sincerely delighted that Liang Shu decided to show them honor and appear here. All the fishermen had already whispered excitedly, realizing that he was the very 9th student of Mr. John, whom everyone has been talking about recently. There were amazing rumors that he destroyed more than 100 mountain demons and became a real hero for a common people. The man, even with a good smile, explained that his son had long said that this young man was becoming a real celebrity. And as soon as the merchant saw Liang Shi, he realized that incredible talents and natural nobility are really hidden in him. Therefore, he asked his sons respectfully greeting Uncle Lion Shi. Obviously, the children immediately obediently bowed, politely greeting the hero with sincere respect. Lion Shi only awkwardly asked that both Mr. and the kids called him simply by name, without unnecessary honors. He also understood. For sure, the master came here for a reason, but for a specific purpose. As it turned out, an influential merchant wanted Liang Shu to become the patron saint of their fishing guild. If he agrees to this proposal, then 20% of all the revenues of the guild will be given to him, and they will also give the best boat that they had. However, the hero, to the sincere surprise of the man, resolutely abandoned such a generous sentence. He perfectly understood what they wanted from him, and he knew that in this cruel world a large fish eats a small one, and he was not going to approve or participate in such. Perhaps the man forgot that Lion Shu was also a simple fisherman. A good reputation really brings benefits, but only he is worthy of it who can bring real benefits to the fisherman. But what will happen later when people get used to his patronage? Local rich will begin to despise him as soon as he enters their circle and will become part of their system. Therefore, he could not help in this matter. Then the desperate man asked for the hero to agree to at least one service. Then the boat will still be it. Recently, evil spirits and demons have increasingly appeared at the borders of the county, and he, as a responsible representative of the guild, could not calmly put up with it. Therefore, he asked the hero to help them destroy them for the safety of ordinary people. As you know, countless treasures and wealth are hidden in the great waters. But all this alluring beauty also hides countless mortal dangers. Water areas are conditionally divided into 2 main zones, shallow water and deep water. The depths are extremely dangerous, but full of rare resources and treasures. Shallow water is a place where ordinary people can safely get, but there are much less resources there. If reasonable perfumes or monsters want to appear in shallow water, they must first notify the river god. Otherwise, they will be immediately evicted and severely punished. At best, Imperial troops Dashin will simply be expelled. At worst, they will completely destroy. For example, that huge crab mother of the claw came in shallow water precisely for the sake of safety, to lay caviar and bring off offspring in a calm atmosphere. And that fight between two powerful spirits occurred in a dangerous deep zone. The spirit that the master spoke of is inhabited just on the border of shallow water and a deep zone. Such places are especially dangerous. Perfumes are often lost and accidentally go into shallow water, violating the established order. Lion Shi, together with the faithful, Afe carefully combed all the environs of the city and county. They expelled all the weak spirits from shallow water, so that most likely this random guest was also not very strong. But the spirit is only a concomitant reward. The most important thing is that Lion Shi is no longer an ordinary person who can only survive in safe, shallow water. Now he had 70% of the merger, and he almost struck the barrier of the body. The hero is ready for great achievements. In the deep zone, you can find only truly valuable treasures, for example, a centenary precious fish. Therefore, Liang Shi decided to start his hunt for rareness. Uppling into cool water, he finally realized what mysterious deep zones were. Things that in shallow water will not be seen with fire in the afternoon. Here they met literally everywhere. Several hours of stubborn searches have passed. His main goal has not yet been found. But suddenly he noticed a water-breathing plant. If you squeeze it in your mouth, an ordinary person will be able to freely breathe underwater for half an hour. There was also an elegant shell of rainstone. Only real aristocratic gentlemen eat such an exquisite delicacy. However, all this was not what the hero was looking for today with such perseverance. But suddenly his little Som felt something and immediately increased in size, preparing for battle. Then the hero realized they found someone by surprise. It turned out to be a 7-star eel, which threateningly gleamed with electric charges. In water spirits, it is impossible to accurately determine force in appearance. But if it is below the level of wolf smoke, they are called simply water spirits, because real monsters are almost never found in these places. Strong dragons live according to their own rules and laws. They come in shallow water for two main reasons. Firstly, they are afraid of the imperial troops of Dashun, and secondly, it is simply unprofitable for them. Ordinary people for them are like a husk of rice, completely useless. Also, some creatures from birth have amazing power, but this fish for the hero was still relatively weak. As a result, he resolutely attacked this sparkling eel. This was easy for him, given that the guy controlled the stream of water in almost 90 jinna. He believed that the fish could not escape from his strong grip. However, the slippery creature still managed to free himself. At this intense moment, someone was much stronger and more dangerous. It was a huge water spirit. It seems that it was about him that master warned the hero. However, whoever it is, this impudent fish dared to gobble up his legitimate booty. Therefore, she had to pay her own life.